Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thanks very much for being here. We are here today for a special council meeting, and for those of you who are live streaming and watching, we very much appreciate it. And for all of council, really appreciate all the work you've done this summer. I was watching Barrie City Council on Monday night, and it was the first meeting they had in a month, and I was a little bit jealous. But we've done some good work this summer and been here to support our residents through this very crazy time. So I want to thank you again so much for participating. So I'll open the meeting and let you all know that we will be at both audio and video recording, and it shall form part of the public record, which will be retained in accordance with the town's retention bylaw. And for further information about the collection, you can contact the clerk's office. So the first item on the agenda will be the approval of the agenda, and I would ask for a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda, and that's moved by Councillor Van Berkel and seconded by Councillor Payne. Is there any agenda repair required from the clerk's office? Anything we need to add, take off? Seeing nothing, all those in favor? That is carried. I would ask if there's any disclosures of interest or if any become apparent to you, perceived or otherwise, please let us know when the item comes up. And we will go on to our business item, which is our community workshop. And I'm going to ask Mr. Rayner to get us started.
Thanks very much. Your worship, members of council, can you hear me okay? Fabulous. Thanks very much, members of council and staff and the public for participating today in our council workshop related to council's vision for 2030, Innovative Innisfil, and the opportunity to take a look at that with all of the things that are swirling around us right now and have been for a number of months, including obviously the global pandemic. So very excited to be able to take some time out of your busy schedules to think about what Innisfil needs to be doing to plant those seeds to make sure that the community arrives where we're pretty close to where you'd like it to by 2030. And you know, a lot has changed, and so I want to have that opportunity to chat with you today. We've got, in terms of what's on tap today, we've got a presentation from Director Kane and Director Bowes, who will provide you with a summary of where the community needs assessment landed, just to refresh your memories, although I know you have the staff reports and approved that back in August. As well as Director Kane will provide some context around the growth considerations given the pandemic and where we're at. And then we're very pleased to have John Matheson from Strategy Corp, again with Council, who, as you will recall, worked with Council to help facilitate the creation of Innovative Innisfil 2030. Not that long ago, actually. In some ways, it feels like an eternity or a lifetime, but actually, it wasn't very long ago at all. In fact, it was just in 2019 when we were working on that together. You started the process back in April 27th of 2019 with the first session with John. There were a number of other workshops and follow-up sessions, and ultimately was adopted in October of 2019 for that vision. And so it was just a little less than a year of work that went into the vision that's in front of you now. So John will provide you with a couple of slides around the context that we find ourselves in, just to sort of follow from Tim and Sue. And then we'll have a facilitated session by John, who has come up with some very creative ways of trying as closely as possible as we can to mimic what a facilitated session in person would look like. Appreciate it's not exactly the same. I think you'll be intrigued by his post-it note approach. but really want to thank you for making this work, even in these difficult circumstances of a virtual meeting. We are live broadcasting, as Her Worship noted, so there may be, well, certainly we hope that you will be comfortable, and to the extent that Her Worship allows, that you ask questions and we engage in a discussion and a workshop. At the same time, encourage you to remember that we can't control whether someone's taping this on the other end of the live broadcast, so what you say may exist forever. So with that, be as natural and relaxed as you possibly can in the circumstances.
Mr. Rayner, can I just interrupt for a minute? Councillor Nicol, and I'm assuming it has something to do with the live stream. Is it, Councillor? Are we having issues?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I do have the live stream up, and it's showing the September 9th council meeting right now, not this one live.
Great, thanks for that clarification, Councillor Nicol. IT and the team are working on it. Johnny, did you have a comment?
Just if you do refresh right now, sorry, there's been a bit of back and forth in the background. If you do refresh right on the homepage and try that link, it should work. And if it's not, absolutely we'll fix it ASAP.
So if you're just tuning in now to Council's workshop about Innovative Innisfil 2030, you haven't missed anything critical yet. We're just working through the logistics and the background details, and we're going to get on to the people that know more about this than I do in just a moment. I was just sharing with Council some of the background around how we arrived today and how we arrived at Innovative Innisfil 2030. I don't want to spend too much more time, Your Worship. Very excited to get into it. I'll just sort of leave you with the note from Winston Churchill, which we've heard a lot over the last several months: never waste a good crisis. And invite you to think deeply about what it is that we do. How can we take this opportunity, if we can call it that, and actually reimagine where we want to be in not that many years from now. So with that, Your Worship, members of Council, staff are, your strategic or steering group, pardon me, your director level is available on the call, although their videos are off. They're available to answer questions, and the broader leadership team is tuning in. This is a very important discussion, and they'll certainly be sharing their ideas and are available if you have specific questions that we will be able to get you answers in real time. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to request that if we could ask members that aren't speaking at the time, if you could go on mute. And again, thank all of the staff that are here to support us today and hear what Council's direction is. So thank you for that.
Great, thanks, Your Worship. So we'll get started with our presentation. So I believe first up is Director Kane and Director Bowes, and I think they're either sharing their screen or Clerks is going to share the screen for them, I think. And there we have the presentation up, and I'll invite them to turn on their cameras and unmute themselves. With your permission, Your Worship, we'll get started.
Good afternoon, Council. Bear with me while I spell my title correctly. A little bit of technical issues and spelling ones apparently. So yes, thank you for the opportunity to talk in these sessions. I always appreciate the opportunity because it is not a rarity, but it's not often that we get to do this and think big. And do it in a collective, particularly for my set of departments that, are very much related to the community strategic plan and how we deal with growth and future. So the presentation is, it's entitled Confirming Our Tack. I named it that intentionally. We named it that intentionally just as a reminder that I think it was last time at the last meeting, strategic workshop that CEO Rayner may have mentioned that, this is a journey that we're on, and yeah, we'll get to the place, for a sailboat, we're going to get to that place eventually, but, there are things and changes in wind that will blow us around a little bit and cause us to step off the path and maybe take a new path and then come back again, as long as we're working towards that common goal. So again, that's how we view the community strategic plan, and certainly existing circumstances suggest that one of our, the wind has changed to some degree, and we'll overcome that. Next slide, please. So this is I had a boring graphic of a picture of our official plan, Our Place, the title page. This is within that same document though, and it captures a lot of those ingredients that I say, that I call them, that we heard from the community and what we know makes a place great. And you'll see overlap with these themes and these words in here with the community strategic plan. And in fact, both our place and the community strategic plan share those main themes of grow, connect, sustain. So, you know, the documents are complementing each other, and in some ways that makes our lives easier as we try and focus on what's important moving forward. Next slide, please. So the next slides are provided as a bit of a background, just as a reminder of what Council saw at the last workshop during the compilation of the last strategic plan of the current one and the one that we're looking at tweaking now. On the latest copy, I had a heart-shaped symbol over the city of Mississauga because I think they're getting tired of us picking on them. It didn't show up in the latest version, so apologies, Mississauga. I did try to hide your identity. That being said, though, and all jokes aside, as I said before, you know, it's just been a product of what growth has been, you know, North American, even globally. So no fault to Mississauga, they've done quite well, but it is a good analogy for us to see where they were, where we are, and what can change, you know, within a couple of generations. Next slide, please. So again, you know, showing Mississauga with the built boundary. Next slide. About 20 years later, you see that drifting north. Next slide. Another 20 years, and there's not much left. And then the final slide, please. And in 2017, so essentially built that scenario. So, you know, that's 60, 70 years plus or minus, where we've seen a whole municipality within proximity of the GTA become built in a form that we may or may not appreciate down the road. Next slide, please. So you know, when Council was giving us some direction last time, and particularly the subject of orbit came up, you know, we talked about what the cost of sprawl could be. So this was a slide that was put together by a team, a think tank out of the University of Ottawa called Sustainable Prosperity. They looked at the cost of sprawl in Canadian cities, and it's quite startling. And you know, what this slide is a reminder of is that, you know, decisions that we make as a community and how we want to grow and how we want to prosper can make significant differences on how that money gets spent, or, you know, our economic footing moving forward in this case. So in the case of suburban sprawl for the city of Greater Halifax, that was estimated to be about, you know, the city's annual cost per household, about $3,400 to sustain a household in the suburban setting. Next slide, please. And then you can see what it costs when you're dealing with built up areas or denser concentrations. So, you know, the reason I have this up here is that, you know, as we think about ways that we can help our community moving forward, wouldn't it be nice to, you know, redirect monies from, you know, unsustainable or expensive infrastructure funding and moving that into programming and other initiatives to make our community better. So, you know, how we grow not only affects us physically, but it also affects, you know, how we're able to best serve our population moving forward. Next slide, please. And this was a slide from the last time as well. So, you know, this is rough estimates, and, you know, we were rubbing a crystal ball back then, and you can only imagine that our ability to rub that crystal ball has been reduced during the last 7 months of COVID. So, you know, I am going to talk a little bit later on, you know, the last 7 months are a relatively short-term blip. So when we look ahead, you know, in that 60 plus years, all going well, and we emerge from a pandemic and vaccines are in place, you know, we're going to continue to grow. So it's a big number. And one of the key questions from the last session was about where these additional people, where's the best place to put them, essentially. Next slide, please. And these were the options that were put forward. So the hybrid model, which is ultimately where I believe Council landed on, was, you know, embracing the concept of the orbit, and that has progressed. I'm going to give an update on that a little bit later. Also looking at, you know, still focusing on our main streets, obviously not turning back on the important roles that they play in all of our various village and settlements. And then also to, you know, that 50,000 new subdivisions, you know, not turning our backs on what's already approved, already in place, and designated for growth over the longer term. Next slide, please. And similarly for employment growth, you know, good news since the last time we met, you know, Innisfil Heights has been expanded. So obviously, you know, we have opportunities for more traditional employment opportunities out in that vicinity. And at the same time, you know, looking at different employment opportunities in those downtown areas, main streets and subdivisions, and orbit as well, in terms of tech incubation and startup space moving forward. Next slide, please. So the previous considerations, as I mentioned, just a reminder of what what questions we were thinking about last time, was, where should development go? What should be protected? What do we want to see for our future generations? Should we care? Which should be a pretty easy question to answer, given that we're all in public service here. And the challenge of managing development pressure moving forward. Next slide, please. So I'm going to ask for a brief recess if I can, Your Worship, only because this isn't the latest version of the slide deck. So if you could give me a few minutes just to sort that, that'd be greatly appreciated. And I'll be contacting Patty very shortly. Sorry for the delay.
Your Worship, members of council, it could be a good opportunity. There's a lot of data there, and no doubt there might be some clarification questions. Happy to answer those as best we can while we address the technical glitch, if there are any questions of clarification at this time.
Thank you. I'm going to start just by, yes, we do pick on Mississauga a lot, but we are very pleased to have former Mayor McCallion as a part-time resident here when she comes to visit her friend Fran and stay at the cottage. And both CEO Rayner and I have reached out to the former city manager Janice Baker, and she's absolutely takes it with the humor in which it's intended. So we're all good there. Questions or comments for clarity or regarding the first few slides that we've seen? Councillor Fowler.
When they did a cost comparison of the urban versus the suburban, where was the greatest amount of savings found? Did they find overall?
Through you, Your Worship. Yeah, through you, Your Worship. It's a great question, Councillor. I'm not sure that the data that we've got in front of us right now highlights the specifics, because there are interesting trade-offs as you move to denser places. Some of the obvious ones that we're familiar with, just given our experience with rural and urban, are things like winter snow clearing, for example. You can imagine how long it takes to clear a subdivision that has 50, 60-foot lots versus the same number of people living in a condo tower right at the orbit, hypothetically speaking, of course. So that would take about 4 minutes, and it would take 40 minutes. So we know that there's some of those obvious ones, but we also have experience with this in terms of not just those services that you saw on the screen, but our hydro distribution company is a great example, where when you compare our rates to others, we are not the lowest in the province, and part of that challenge is we have the same geographic size in Mississauga, actually, as you know, and but we can't spread those fixed costs of the supply and the distribution side across the same number of people. So often that's the math. If you think about some of those costs that are embedded, that are required to service the community, and then you distribute those across the number of households, we just don't have the number of households that make that work. Fire is another good example. If you think of Bradford, West Gwillimbury, today, if I'm not mistaken, they have one fire hall for nearly the same population, and we have five fire halls. So, and that's a factor of our geographic size and wanting to make sure that we have a response time that's appropriate and as best as we possibly can manage. So that's what that has. Certainly, Councillor, happy to get back to you in terms of the ranking of those specific pieces. That data may exist from the Smart Prosperity Institute. I just don't have it at my fingertips at the moment.
I would argue, Jason, another one to add to that would be any kind of linear infrastructure. So roads, water pipe, sewer pipe, stormwater, all of that, costs a lot of money. So if you can have more residents in less an area, there's going to be a great savings. I think Halifax is a bit of a stretch because Halifax municipality, the regional municipality of Halifax, HRM, is huge. Like you can drive for 6 hours and you're still in Halifax. It's similar to Ottawa, right? When you think of Ottawa, you think of Ottawa, you know, right around the Rideau, but Ottawa contains many other towns, and I can't name them all, but if you think of when you're driving into Ottawa and you hit this welcome to Ottawa, you're still 45 minutes from what you think of as Ottawa. Councillor Orsatti.
Thank you. I just want to touch bases on the slide that says in 60 years, we could be a population of 150,000 to 250,000. I look at, and I know we were, what are we slated for now? 50,000 currently? And I just wonder what has to be in place to make that happen, or have that pressure placed on us. If you look at King City, that is off of the 400 corridor, that has a lot of agricultural land, they have not expanded their population size, and there doesn't seem to be a pressure for them to do so. So what would create the pressure for Innisfil to be that large? And the benefits, and because there's a lot, I mean, there is benefits, but there's a lot of consequences to it as well.
Sure. Well, a lot of King City is covered by the Greenbelt, but I'll let Mr. Rayner answer.
Thanks, Worship. No, that was going to be my first point as well. A lot of the GTHA growth, when you sort of look at the map and the horseshoe, has this gap from the green belting that occurred. I've forgotten the year, sorry. So a lot of the growth is now and has been for a number of years, and will continue to jump over that green belt and fill up those areas that are right around the outside of that green belt. So that's the first piece, is just the necessity as a result of the growth that's coming into the GTHA area. The other point I guess I would make is, and I'm sorry you don't have the slide in front of you, but if you'll take my word for it, it's not a steep increase, and it's not a radically exponential growth. It's actually a fairly steady curve that's increasing over time, and that's meant to show you sort of what our growth rates have been over the last few years and where we project them to go as a result of that continued growth curve. It's absolutely true that it may go up or down, in any given year, but the idea that there continues to be an influx of population into those municipalities around the GTHA, just outside of the Greenbelt, is a given at the moment. Certainly, the higher levels of government believe that through immigration and other forms of population growth, we are in need of that in order to be able to service the boomer generation as they retire. We need to have our economy will depend on those people coming in and those jobs working. So it's an analysis that our planning team has done. It isn't. I would say it's not an exact science, Your Worship and members of council. It was meant to be a bit of the back of the napkin. What lands do we have? What could the capacity, based on our current understanding, what could it look like to paint that picture? And what I'd invite you to do is consider that the current population growth, based on the land use planning regime in Ontario, really are only in that sort of 10-year, 2031, 2041, 20-year window. But the decisions you are making will have impact well beyond that growth period. There are municipalities in Ontario that have tried to take a very firm no growth or very low growth approach. The success is limited in part because the province is the one that holds the keys to the growth decisions. As you know, this provincial government has recently decided to interpret and provide guidance around population growth as being minimum numbers, not maximum numbers. And so, the expectation is that there's growth that's coming. Where do you want to put it? But we're happy to take your direction, Council, about where we land on that growth discussion. And I think Mr. Kane's slide that showed the hybrid of where Council thought that rough distribution could be in terms of subdivision, the orbit. Sorry, I'm just looking for it on my screen. Would be helpful in terms of balancing that growth, so it's not all just high density. There continues to be some single family dwelling, a considerable amount, and so that's the concept, is that we're sort of finding that balanced growth. We're certainly not putting up signs that indicate that we want as much growth as the province will give us or the county will give us, but we are trying with this vision to manage that growth and ensure that we've got it going in the right places and at the right time. I see Mr. Kane has returned, and we have a slide in front of us. I'll turn it back to him.
Sorry, just before Mr. Kane starts, I did see one other hand. Councillor Waters, did you want to ask now, or did you want to wait till after Mr. Kane's?
I just wanted to make a point that this current government sees our economic growth dependent on cities growing, and hence why they've moved to minimums as opposed to maximums for development. So they certainly see Ontario's prosperity kind of restricted right now without these without the minimums being applied to us. So it seems to me that the province wants us to grow. It wants all areas to grow, and they see our economic recovery based around that. So if the province is pushing development, it's best for us to be looking at how do we best accommodate that. I would also ask the question is, do we have a map of Innisfil which shows those lands which are currently owned by developers? And if there's any pressure, it's going to come from developers. If they own that land and they're not in the settlement zones, that they're certainly going to be putting pressure on us to open those up, drive the infrastructure to those spots to allow that to happen. So I just thought it'd be interesting to see a map like that in terms of that ownership and what those expectations of those developers are over the next 30 years.
Thank you. Mr. King?
Yes, now that my heart is back where it's supposed to be and not in my throat, we can get started. Just to answer Councillor Waters' question, the ownership map, it's certainly something we've looked at in the past. It's quite difficult because of, various holding companies and numbered corporations, even within, agricultural operations, to determine, what lands are actually being held by a developer. But it could certainly be an indicator. We can look at that again and see, but it has proved difficult in the past to do that. But we can certainly something we can look at again for sure. All right, so I'll get going again. It's nice to know that I'm replaceable as Director of Growth when the CAO can fill in while I'm gone. So thank you for that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kane, I saw one more hand. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. I just was going to add to the question about land ownership in Innisfil and it being agricultural or rural. You only have to look at the value of what land is right now to determine that the majority of it is not owned by farmers. It's owned by speculators, developers, and the like. The price of land is very restrictive for farmers to own it right now.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. Mr. King, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Worship, and again, apologies for the delay. And then we'll get going. So what's changed and what hasn't since those background slides I showed you previously? Basically the long-term growth plan projections, and I did join back in when I was hearing some of those growth plan comments from Councillor Waters, market demand and behavior, progress in the orbit, economic landscape, and opportunities that we may have to reset ourselves locally. So looking at the long-term growth projections, some of you may have seen these numbers before, certain maybe not in a consolidated fashion. But as you may recall, earlier this month, the province did update the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and as Councillor Waters alluded to, they did change the schedule to focus on minimums rather than caps or targets that were previously in the last growth plan. So, what that means for the county is a population increase of almost 60,000 people from that period from 2041 to 2051. We had numbers to 2041 last time. They basically projected further out, which we've been asking for quite some time, just to let us know what the expectations are there. At the same time, on a countywide basis, increasing employment by over 45,000 jobs, 46,000 jobs, which is fairly ambitious. And that employment ratio is higher, that jobs to employment ratio is higher than what it was in the 2041 numbers. So there's going to be some hard work to do there, to do now, because traditionally it has been difficult trying to, as we all know, trying to get those employment numbers to match our residential growth. So that challenge will continue. At the same time, our neighbor to the north, they've been given an increase in population as well, by about 88,000 people, and an increase in jobs as well. So again, fairly aggressive targets, which will create local growth pressures for sure, because there's no reason to think that growth pressures in the GTA are going to change. As I've mentioned before, in front of this group, is that the GTA is one of the fastest growing regions in North America, and I don't think there's any reason to think otherwise that will change. Immigration patterns may change a little bit in the short term, but certainly long term, and looking what's happening to our neighbors in the south, I'm assuming that GTA looks pretty appealing right now for most people. So expect that growth pressure to continue at a regional basis and even at a local basis. And just as a note as well, as part of our submission that we made to the province with the growth plan, we have noticed what appears to be a deficient area of land with our neighbor to the north, that would require them to have additional land to accommodate that 298,000 within the boundary, within the city of Barrie boundary. So that's something we're watching quite closely, and obviously something that we're going to be working, taking a regional approach on with our friends at the county and the city to try and figure out what an integrated growth solution looks like for the area. So I didn't ask at the beginning, does council want to have discussion with Ian or ask me questions with Ian, or are they okay for me to finish my presentation and then hit me out?
Council? I'd ask, unless it's burning, that maybe we have them at the end, because what happens most of the time is the very next slide is going to answer the question you're going to ask. Councillor Fowler?
Sorry. The one question I have, when there's reference to Barrie needing to take more land.
Sorry, next slide. Sorry, Councillor. Patty, next slide, please. That would make, yes, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Fowler.
Go ahead, Councillor Fowler.
With Barrie growing, and it appears, what it appears to be with Barrie, from our perspective, is that they have a fill. They just blatantly filling the land that they've obtained from us, from the last, changing their dynamic and how they use and populate the space that they have. What do we, last time, if I remember correctly, at the last meeting, we discussed what we could do to counteract potential opportunities for them in the future to obtain more of Innisfil's land. Do we still have that in play? Do we have a means of securing what we have as ours so that they are forced to change the dynamic in which they infill?
Through your worship to Councillor Fowler, what we're suggesting in our last submission to the province is that we think there's ability to work, because this isn't just a Barrie Innisfil problem, right? It's a South Simcoe problem. So what we're proposing to the province is to have those discussions much sooner in advance, to see what are those various growth scenarios within the municipalities in South Simcoe, and work together more collectively than what's been done in the past, moving forward. So it's certainly a discussion that we can come back to council with at another time, but at this point we're taking a much more collective approach to reflect what we see is a more progressive relationship than what's been there before.
Go ahead, Mr. Kane. And we're in the workshop mode now, so if we can dispense with through your worship stuff and just have a good hearty conversation, I think that would be more informal, might be more workable.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please, Patty. And this is probably the one that's going to generate a lot of discussion for the group here today. So, and it relates to those growth patterns that council, that hybrid option that we focused on at the last workshop, and resulted in orbit beginning to take shape. So, the data that you see in the screen, that table, is actually came from Simco.com today. It was a story that I still get the newspaper, believe it or not. So it was a newspaper that landed at the end of my driveway. So it's I think we all had a feeling that the local real estate market was chugging along quite well, but year over year for the month of August, you're seeing basically a doubling of sales in Innisfil, and with that, an increase in the average price by 42%. So it's a startling number. And you're seeing a similar trend in the county and in Barrie as well. And there was no condo data in the article, and I didn't have a chance to explore it further. But even the condo market that you think, we all think that during a pandemic that no one wants to live in a condo. That doesn't seem to be the case even locally here. So those sales continue to be healthy, and even in a regular point in time, that would be considered a very healthy sales figure, let alone what we're facing right now. So there are changes happening in market demand and behavioral changes. We're seeing that, what the numbers on the screen, bring it home, no pun intended, to Innisfil and to this region. But it's happening in a lot of places in North America and beyond, where, those drivers of this blip in the real estate market, might be fear, might be, the ability to remote work, low interest rates where people can, potentially spend more in a home. And then conversely, there might be economic hardship as well, driving, sales and increasing supply in the market as well. So long story short, the demand for ground related housing is increasing. We're seeing that. Those sales are increasing. People are moving farther from cities. It's a bit of I don't want to call it a planning nightmare, but it's certainly something that the planning profession isn't relishing. It took years and years to get us to start to think and look inwardly at more dense urban type development, and get people in the mindset of taking transit. And here we are, hopefully on a short-term basis, seeing some reversals in those behaviors that we're improving our ability to grow more responsibly over the longer term. At the same time, too, there's also changes in the rental market as well, in a good way. The short-term rental market, through apps and through various platforms has been reduced significantly, and the result of that is a longer-term supply of rentals as well, and better prices too. So there's a whole lot of flux in the system at the moment, and I think John may touch on some of that in his presentation coming up. As these short-term changes are being seen, it brings up questions about the relevancy of responsible growth, and in particular cities that rely on transit and higher density. So, I think that was top of mind, as part of some of the orbit discussions that we had. There is short-term market changes, but also too, we can't forget what history's taught us about great cities in the world, right? Some of the largest and growing cities have been through pandemics. They've been bombed to within an inch of their life. They've been leveled and invaded. So, those places seem to pop back up, and it speaks to the resiliency and that basic human need that, creates that activity and allows them to thrive and meet the needs of the residents. So, this is an unfortunate situation, but we still see, the planning profession still sees cities being the primary mode of growth, and those urban places that do keep people closer together, which is counterintuitive as well, because certainly you don't want to be close to people these days, or certainly close to strangers is what you want it to be. But research is already showing there was 900 counties that were studied in the U.S. Back in May and June of this year during the pandemic, and there was no correlation between density and sickness during this pandemic. So it's quite interesting. And in fact, the fatality rates were lower in more dense urban areas than what they were in suburban counties. So it's counterintuitive in some ways, but the underlying theme seems to be that infectious disease is a short-term impact that can be managed to some degree, through what we're seeing now and those measures that we're seeing now. The effect of suburbs and those patterns of growth that create longer term health impacts for people, that contribute to obesity and disease are ultimately more damaging for those communities as well. That's the physical side. And then on the mental side, you have more disjointed communities and communities that aren't as connected that make them less resilient. And as a result, people don't adapt as well when they're stressed through an infectious disease event. So it's quite interesting work that's going on right now. Unfortunately, there's an event that's triggering more and more of that research. At the same time, places like Orbit and urban situations are looking at, improving those neighborhoods through specific design and improvements like wider sidewalks and bike lanes and better quality outdoor spaces. So long story short, we're going to keep advocating for compact development. The race to suburbia, it's one of those things that seemed like a good idea at the time. But, based on what this planner is hearing and what others are hearing and researching is that overall the long-term and chronic health conditions created by suburban growth are much worse for our residents. Next slide, please. The Orbit progress, just very briefly, because it was in front of council not that long ago in July. As I mentioned, the lessons that we're learning right now are being built into that design. As a station and center of mass continue to be designed in consultation with Metrolinx and the developer. And council can expect a report to move the project forward and start laying the groundwork for planning permissions within the next few weeks. So that is happening. Next slide, please. The economic landscape is also something that's changing. As John's going to mention in his presentation, we have this dichotomy of have and have-nots. People that have been impacted significantly by it, and other people that are relatively unscathed. So, unlike other typical disasters or events, traumatic events, COVID tends to not treat people the same based on their social and economic status. So that creates a challenge. And I'm not sure if Patty's trying to hurry me up, but that creates a challenge whereby, there's global trends that are changing with respect to, much broader discussions about things like basic income and countries willing to take on more debt in those larger picture items, and then locally through the results of the survey, which will be up on the screen shortly, I'm sure. There was an economic impact study done by the County of Simcoe that touched on about almost 500 people, business owners in the county, towards the end of May and beginning of June over that 2-week period. And you're seeing some of the impacts that they're feeling there. So a 70% reduction in revenues based on what they typically be tracking for. You're seeing in that bottom left graphic, you're seeing what impacts it's having on the business in terms of, businesses closed temporarily, and those where are facing significant pressure and increasing that 29% piece. And then the other helpful piece that, certainly Dan Taylor's department is working on right now in ECDEV is, what do they need the most from municipal government right now? And, there is a common theme that we're seeing. It's the financial side, of course. So what can we do to keep those businesses running over the long term? Next slide, please. And this is time for the reset. So, the old normal had its challenges for sure. So is there a reason to go back to those economic issues, those employment issues, those environmental issues, and decreasing standards of living in some areas of the world? Is there a rush to go back to that? So, the good thing is the pandemic has shown that we can change quickly when we have to, when we have the community interest at heart, and when we're thinking in a collective frame of mind. And as a result, there is more and more discussion, and the World Economic Forum is putting forward this Great Reset idea, whereby economics that are more fair, that's what we should be moving towards, and the inclusivity that comes with that. Investments that advance shared goals, and investing more sustainably and more equitably in infrastructure projects and other investments that are made. And then embracing technological innovation to continue to assist us as we face challenges. Next slide, please. In terms of the local, that's a global movement, and we don't have a lot of control of that. So, you know, how does that transcend to the local situation? So, this concept, the 2020 Declaration for Resilience in Canadian Cities, was introduced in that report. There's three main themes in there. They're listed on the screen. You know, I can say thankfully that, you know, there are elements of the community strategic plan and the official plan and even the culture plan that are certainly putting us on the right path to addressing some of those objectives. So we are on the right path, but you know, how can we be doing more? And you know, one of those things is doing more sustainably, not just studying and talking about and writing reports about, but actually doing more sustainably. And you know, we have the benefit of Orbit to help drive some of those sustainability principles, and as well as pilot projects as they come along, like the Habitat for Humanity project that is featuring passive housing. And at the same time, too, the last bullet point there, the first initiatives, that's just a trigger for, you know, some food for thought. So, you know, the reset is a big topic and a heavy item to burden ourselves with, and quite honestly, we don't have a lot of control over those. But, you know, as we look about, you know, what the local community needs are in Sue's presentation, starting on the next slide, you know, what are those things that we can do as part of that reset or consistent with that reset that help meet those community needs? So, you know, if there is interest, you know, in today's discussion, certainly staff can capture that and bring a future report back, you know, with some implementable ideas, and start to think about, you know, what are those 2 or 3 things that we can start doing sooner rather than later to start getting us on that path that will help our community more quickly and help them become more resilient. So, Sue, that's over to you. Next slide, please.
Thank you, and thank you to Council. So the material that I will discuss is going to be familiar as it was presented to Council in August, but I thought it would be important to revisit for this purpose. So when COVID-19 hit our community, we recognized that it meant enormous change for everyone, but we also realized that we would need to hear about its impact directly from the community members affected the most. And these insights can provide one lens from which to view the community's strategic plan and assess whether it will continue to work well in a COVID and a post-COVID world. Next slide, please. So throughout the spring and summer, we brought staff from our One Town, One Team together with service organizations, community partners, and champions. And we asked them what their biggest concerns regarding COVID were now and also looking into the future. Next slide, please. And they clearly told us. So together they determined 5 priority areas or themes. And these themes mirror many of those identified by researchers who over the past 7 months have been studying the impacts of the emergency. And it really affirms that our community members with lived experience understand very well the implications of the pandemic on their own lives and the lives of their neighbors. Next slide, please. So pandemics have always rewritten history and reordered society, and they have deep impacts on us as a people, a country, a society. They can also act as a social X-ray, highlighting the stresses and strains that have existed. And it's been made clear by COVID that it has deepened divides and made an already unequal society even more so. However, I also think it's given us a unique opportunity to stop, to pause, and rethink. COVID has illuminated the challenges, that is the divisions between rich and poor, issues of wealth and health, racial injustice, social inclusions. And without understating the devastating consequences of, that our community has faced as a result of the pandemic, I would ask you to consider this as an opportunity to examine the community's strategic plan through the COVID lens. So we'll explore each of these themes in a little bit more detail. So next slide, please. So we know isolation has long been an issue for seniors and youth in our community, but the restrictions placed on us due to the pandemic have exacerbated that struggle for everyone. And we heard that loud and clear at our virtual roundtables, that our community is looking to us to strengthen community connections. So looking to the future, we can ask ourselves, how can we plan for more opportunities to connect and support residents as we work together to rebuild a more resilient community? Next slide, please. So there are a number of threads captured in this theme. One is simply finding accurate information. We know information is everywhere, but just because it's online doesn't make it true. And residents really want to know what to believe and where to find accurate information. And if they can't access the information online, how do we communicate constantly evolving information in a timely and effective way? Connectivity is another important piece of this puzzle. With so much information being shared online, and as many have shifted to remote work overnight, access to technology and to connectivity is becoming a priority that is really on par with essential services like water and hydro. And the other piece of the puzzle is digital literacy. Not everyone has the digital literacy skills required to access information online, and yet so many of the services that are needed are only offered now virtually. So clearly this is another area where that divide between the haves and the have-nots has become clearer through COVID, where some residents experiencing poverty used to make decisions between paying for food or heat. Connectivity has become another strain. So looking to the future, what is our role in the provision of access to reliable information and technology for our community? Next slide, please. Economic stress and uncertainty is a major issue as community members navigate this changing situation. Basic needs such as food, clothing, medication, housing have been a challenge for our residents. Again, this is not new, but it has been exacerbated. And the pandemic has introduced a new subset of people who are managing well enough pre-pandemic, but are now moving into a more financially precarious situation. And a newly emerging issue is that parenthood has become the new divide. Specifically, mothers have borne the brunt of childcare responsibilities and balancing the work-life balance. It is predicted that the pandemic will set women back decades, with many dropping out of the labor force due to childcare responsibilities. And that has long-term consequences for the quality of life and economic recovery. For community members who are racialized, marginalized, or living in poverty, the pandemic is amplifying their pre-existing precarious financial situations. Next slide, please. And employment is closely connected to the theme of economic security. We know 5.5 million adults in Canada have either been affected by job loss or reduced work hours during the COVID-19 lockdown, which means that these people and their households have significant reductions in income for necessities such as food and shelter. Residents have expressed concern that local businesses will not survive this pandemic, and they've also noted that the food bank will continue to experience increases in usage. Next slide, please. Mental health is shaped by the social determinants of health, those that are the everyday conditions in which we live. Increases in mental health challenges have been attributed to months of physical distancing, growing job loss, economic uncertainty, housing and food insecurity, and childcare or school closures. At the community consultations, participants anticipated that mental health will be the next big storm, and they were not wrong. The Canadian Mental Health Association has warned that mental health distress as a result of COVID can be characterized as an echo pandemic with long-term consequences. Next slide. So council has the ability to bring our community together by shaping strategic priorities. I'm sure that none of you expected to have to deal with a pandemic during your term, but it is the actions that you take now that will define how successful Innisfil can be at recovery and rebuilding. Community resilience is the ability to withstand, adapt to, and recover from adversity. The resilient community is one that can take collective action after an adverse event because it's developed the resources to reduce the impact of major disturbances. Resilient communities build community connections, promote physical, mental, and social health, develop economies that support a good quality of life for everyone. Resilient communities can weather short-term challenges as well as extreme challenges, whether that be a pandemic or the negative effects of climate change. In closing, I would say our residents gave us a gift when they shared their COVID stories and concerns during the community needs assessment consultation. And this is our opportunity to stop, to pause, rethink, and build back better, to be more inclusive, to recognize the value in strengthening and building community connections, to ensure that residents have opportunity and supports in their own municipality, to address the issues as identified by our own residents that have been amplified by the pandemic. So we're here today to seize the opportunity to assess the current community strategic plan in light of what we've learned in the last 7 months. Next slide, please. And having said that, Mr. Kane and I are happy to answer questions that you may have, or we can proceed to the next part of the workshop.
Thank you for that, for both Tim and Susan. Questions or comments? Councillor Orsatti?
Thank you. Just a comment. I know from all the documents that were sent to us, you know, it was consistent that the main concern from our community and coming up in the COVID updates was that residents felt their biggest concern was isolation and mental health. And also, Susan, when you were touching on the connectivity, I thought that the difference between Innisfil with being a urban rural community outside of a city is that we have such a large portion of our population that that do not have the technology. So one, they don't have the tools, they don't have computers, they don't have internet, and if they do, they have limited to almost nil skills in how to we're going to be able to support them and how they're going to be able to connect, I think, for the next 2 years. So I see that as a challenge for Innisfil and how we're going to support the residents with that. And that, I think, is, you have a large population in Sandy Cove, and you have others that just with the living on almost a poverty level, or those that are now losing jobs, they can't afford the luxury of different things, and they may have to give up some of the tools that will provide them with that. So I just wonder if, I guess just the thoughts of how we're going to tackle that challenge.
And I think, if I may respond, I think we have some things in place already, some strategies like the digital strategy, where we recognize the gaps, the technology deserts. We have programs in place that I think just require a shift. So we are a nimble municipality. So we are looking at the actions that came out of the community needs assessment, and are looking at all of the existing programs we have in place in order to shift and pivot and address the needs that were identified. So that work is happening right now.
And that did come out loud and clear during the community roundtables. We had representatives from Sandy Cove actually who spoke about technical literacy. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll carry on.
It is my pleasure to hand over the reins to John Matheson, our facilitator.
Welcome, John. Thanks for being with us again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Just before you start, I just want to acknowledge that we really tried to be able to do this in person, because we all wanted to do that, but Unfortunately, with the numbers the way they are currently, the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit was not, nor our own COVID task force was willing to, I won't say give us permission, but even recommend such a move. So we appreciate you being with us virtually, John.
Well, and I really appreciate the chance to be with you again. I should first ask, can everybody hear me okay? Please, if that ever becomes a problem, just let me know. And secondly, are you seeing the proposed outline of the discussion on the screen now? Good. Well, look, first thing I'm going to do is I was asked to kind of round out the two excellent presentations you just had with some thinking from our municipal team at Strategy Corp about some of the larger trends that we think you're likely to face over the life of this plan that you're thinking about again. And I'll do that very quickly to try and make sure that we stay on time. And then we're going to do two things. We're going to go back to the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats that we looked at together about 16 months ago. And just with a quick look to sort of see what's still the same, because I think you'll find a lot of things that were great about Innisfil, or a lot of things that were challenging about Innisfil are the same. But we want to sort of highlight what you would have said differently if you'd known then like you know now, as the blues man would say. And then after a quick break, or depending on how long that takes, depending on how long you want to spend on that, the proposal was to try and go through each of the different aspects of the strategic plan and just give you a chance to get your direct commentary on them, having due regard to all the experiences that you've had. And as Mayor Dolan said, I've got a bunch of screens here too, so if I look like I'm looking oddly off into bizarre distances, you'll understand why. But just quickly, let me take you through some perspectives on provincial trends. This is work that we did at Strategy Corp with our team of senior advisors that actually makes up a couple of other people from the old Mississauga senior management team, and I can also confirm that they are not offended by Innisfil's comparing. We have their former chief general counsel as well as their former head of planning, and I agree they're quite chilled about comparing your growth to theirs. But also Michael Fenn, who I think is probably known to many of you, and Shirley Hoy, the former city manager of the city of Toronto, and former deputy solicitor general Matt Turigan. So we had quite an editorial board on this one. So just the first observation, it's self-evident that we're not through COVID yet. And so to some degree, it's folly to even be, it's great to be doing a refresh, but we all have to acknowledge that we don't know what's around the corner. Whether that's in the context of how bad a second wave might be, and I'm sure we're all knocking on wood, or the time frame to a vaccine, but also more kind of close to home problems like what is going to happen in terms of the federal government or the provincial government with cash relief to municipalities for 2021. Because we know that it was terrific news in the summer when we learned that there was roughly 4 million or so that was coming to municipalities or transportation systems as a result of the federal provincial Safe Start funding, but nobody knows what's going to happen for 2021 yet. And so that's certainly a concern. I think equally pressing, given many of the concerns about income security that came through your community consultation, the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit and the Emergency Wage Supplement were both very powerful, very expensive programs that the federal government operated, which I think blunted a lot of the terrible economic dislocation that we might otherwise have experienced. And as you no doubt know, those programs are coming to an end. Or at least they're going to be modified in a way that will be less advantageous to the recipients. So I think there's some pretty big unknowns right now about what the sort of the foot race is between the return to the workplace versus, the people who have been relying on this support. One hardly needs mention economic uncertainty of a broader kind in the U.S. election, but because that's self-evident. But then, of course, the other thing is the fragmentation of all of this. And this is the point that I think both of your colleagues made earlier. that it's possible to have gone through this dislocation and been inconvenienced, but not substantially affected. And it's also possible to have been devastated either by illness or by economic circumstance. And it really puts an emphasis on the requirement to target, because you really run the risk in shoveling out aid and it getting to the wrong people. And that's particularly important because we know that Ontario, before the crisis happened, was on track for a deficit of around 9 billion, and now it's sitting at something more like 41 billion. And we know that the government of Canada was on track for something like 23 billion, and now it's sitting at more like 260. So I don't think this is any reason to panic. Interest rates are low, but anyone who knows history of municipalities in Ontario knows that when the senior governments are heavily indebted, that's when you get the greatest efforts at either constraint or the biggest efforts at cut rolling downhill at the municipal sector. I don't project that that's going to happen between now and the next provincial election, but I think we all have to be ready for some pretty lean years in terms of transfers. Any moment in time that can be described as the immediate emergency is over and there's been an election, I think is a time when the Minister of Finance is going to say, so the next priority is to try and address our hugely increased debt and deficit as a result of all of these emergency activities. And that's never good news for the municipal sector. So that points us in the five things that you're going to wind up being expected to do. And none of these are new, but I think it's fair to say they're all going to be worse than usual. There's going to be this expectation that you be tax competitive, so you're not going to have carte blanche for raising taxes, which is be like the municipal equivalent of the provincial and federal carte blanche to raise debt. No one's going to let you do that. There's going to be all kinds of pressure for efficiency and reduction of operating costs, while at the same time improving or maintaining services and potentially filling gaps that are left by others. And I just finished mentioning the CERB and its expiry. So, when there's a need, municipalities are often expected to try and fill it. You're going to be expected to reduce red tape to try and get the economy going, but of course, maintaining full public protection. And of course, any regulation or bylaw is red tape unless it's absolutely essential. And the trick is always knowing which is which. You're going to be expected to promote the recovery, and you're going to be expected to continue to be able to respond to disruption. So none of that's new, but that is going to be the baseline, which means everything is going to be rather tight. Against that backdrop, and I'll be very quick on these, and I'll let you read them because we've both, I've explained each one on an individual slide, but I've also, the materials available on our website. That's a couple of papers that we released just before the EMO conference that elaborate on each of these. And the main 6 points here are, Innisfil knows all about the digital revolution. It's in many respects a leader in the municipal digital revolution. It's going to move a lot faster. And that the banking industry and the travel industries have already pretty much totally revolutionized the way in which they deal with people. And we anticipate that the massive rapid adoption of new ways of doing things in the sector that we saw through COVID-19 is going to continue to accelerate. And so we're expecting in the next couple of years that the pressures that I was describing in the first couple of slides, as people turn for greater efficiencies, this is where they're going to turn. And this meeting itself is evidence of how this can affect public engagement, and that's likely to be a positive thing. But it's all about making it work. Tim's already mentioned the new directions in community planning and housing. I would just underscore one in particular. You see where it's got the arrow and it says, you're going to need to understand how facilitating deconcentration of people moving from big centers to smaller centers relates to trying to contain sprawl, and the risk that one-size provincial policies may not be a really comfortable fit. Well, what do I mean by deconcentration? I mean the reality that since we've all learned that remote work works, if you've got the freedom to live wherever you want, and if access to jobs and close proximity to the bank towers in downtown Toronto is no longer a reason, to live in downtown Toronto? Do we really think people are going to continue to cluster in the large urban centers? And what kind of amenities will you be offering to try and compete to get the right, like to get the people who you want to have moving here, to get the volumes of people that you want to have moving here? What's the new definition of the community going to look like in that context? I think that's a really interesting question. The other thing is, Innisfil has already been on the front end of coming up with a disruptive solution to the transit question, by embracing Uber. And we know that land use was largely determined by the private automobile post-World War II in all sorts of ways. If that's going to continue changing, and if people don't have to be stuck in downtown Toronto anymore, I think you're really going to see the changing mode in our transportation policies, really changing the way in which we grow. And again, I'm sorry to be rushing through this, but to respectful of your time. New models of policing and public safety, obviously, since the whole, appropriate and strong public focus on Black Lives Matter and concerns about traditional models of policing have risen. We've heard all sorts of different recommendations as how to deal with it. I'm not sure that we'll move to defunding the police, but I do believe, and my colleagues believe, that we will move to substantial changes in the way we deliver policing, but not just policing, also fire and other emergency assistance. Because whether you're concerned about the police or whether you're just concerned about the diversity of health-related type emergencies that emergency services tends to respond to, and how it just doesn't feel like we have optimized the way in which we deal with either mental illness or substance abuse or family crisis situations in terms of all the different professionals who we could be deploying. It's not immediately apparent that we've optimized that with a system that we have that still has its roots in the 19th century. So we expect fairly substantial change there. The last two are about more structural change, and one is about regional service areas for regional problems. There's a lot of problems that frankly operate on regional catchment areas, not necessarily local boundaries. But we all know that doing restructuring of municipal governments is about as popular as a skunk in a garden party. And so there's lots of ways to organize services along regional delivery without actually getting into boundary changes or things like that. I think we'll be seeing more exploration of that as the problems don't go away. The problems are regional, but we don't necessarily have the right catchment areas or the right service boundary areas in order to be able to do what we need to do. And finally, the overall role of local government is something that we constantly need to be reevaluating, given that, as we all know, and certainly Mayor Dolan has shown considerable leadership on this through her admirable service at AMO over the years. Everybody understands that there is not a proper alignment of the funding tools for municipalities that go with the responsibilities. I think it's a lovely example of this, that your community members who participated talked about all sorts of things that would never have been considered core municipal responsibilities 25 years ago. But they look at you as being, well, who, if not you, who else is going to help? And whether that's in advocacy, where you become an advocate for getting the help they need, or whether they can persuade you to get involved in direct delivery, those are questions to work out carefully and as business cases suggest. But you see, I have the little arrow here on reevaluate the emerging role of municipal government in the public healthcare system, including areas that you're sprawling into now, like long-term care, hospital capital funding, public health, physician recruitment in underserved areas, land ambulance, and then as that starts to drift into social and children's services, and that's very often mental health, which again, as was said earlier by Director Bose, is like the #1 priority people have. So clearly, lots and lots and lots of significant factors in play here. And the real question is going to be who ought to be delivering them and who's got the right funding, sustainable funding base. And I think it's going to be very careful, to play one's hand carefully as a municipality on the advocacy side, on the convening side, but being very prudent about getting drawn into additional delivery areas that are more appropriately the province, unless there's appropriate funding that comes with it. obviously, there's a whole lot more that could be said about this, but I should probably wind that up. And we can, unless you have any questions, I think it's probably far more important to hear from you and what you think about the SWOT analysis, and we can get into your strategic plan. So that's my quick summary of the other factors that I think you're going to be experiencing over the life of your plan.
Anybody want to rethink their election in 2018? Sorry. Go ahead, John. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. So I am now going to do something that I have never tried before, and this is like without a safety net or anything. I am going to switch to not presentation mode, and I'm going to try and use this as a sort of a virtual whiteboard. As you will all remember, I'm kind of addicted to yellow stickies. And I see no reason why we should not have yellow stickies just because we are not in the same place. I think they're very important because they're a way of capturing your interaction in real time for everybody to see. So what I have done is I have provided myself with a whole supply, a limitless supply of virtual yellow stickies. There is a yellow sticky for any comment that you wish to make. And what you see here on the screen in front of you, aside from my yellow stickies, is the SWOT analysis that came out of the interviews that I did with you and with some of your senior staff, and that we validated at the session that we did last April. And so you've seen this before, and the idea was to just kind of go through them and get your sense of what's changed. And the reason for that is just simple. It's really easy to say everything has changed. But it's also useful to say, well, actually, some things haven't changed. And there's some things that we can still rely on, because the goal here is to figure out whether your plan will still serve your needs or whether it needs to be amended. And so if I could just ask you, I don't propose to read this at you, because you can all read faster than I can talk. But on these strengths, like these attributes of Innisfil as a community, do any of these things seem to have changed in a way that you want to make a comment about since we last convened?
Sorry, Dan?
I've been quiet up to now. Under strengths, under lifestyle and natural attributes, can we move those lakefront areas? Because this summer with the pandemic, I think the first one is swimmable lake area near GO Train and GTA, and under natural attributes, lakefront areas, because man, they were one of our biggest nightmares this summer through the COVID experience.
And this is because of people from outside coming in and misusing the amenity, if you will, or putting stress on them.
It was even brought up yesterday in a conversation that at one time, Innisfil's beach was the #1 destination for people from the GTA. And yes, it was a strength, but under COVID experience, it became one of our biggest nightmares.
Okay, that's great. So far, are you seeing my yellow sticky in real time? Is it working so far? Look at that. And I won't even get ink on my fingers. Other comments?
Other comments? Alex.
I guess along the same lines as Dan was talking about, is that I think it showed that we were able to respond to that. Like, it was a problem, but I thought the staff came up with some innovative solutions around the circles and around the beach in motion. So I think it tested us in terms of coming up with innovative solutions. And I think Barry tried to follow us, and a lot of other communities tried to follow us. So I think it showed that because we're nimble, and we have, I think, younger staff, that we were able to come up with a solution and stopping outsiders from using the beach. It certainly showed that we were nimble enough to adapt to those changes, and I think that goes to our smallness and our ability to change.
Great. Other comments?
Others? Donna?
Thank you. I think for these social issues that are still manageable, re mental health, I think it's manageable, but only with the cooperation with other organizations to address the increasing pressures on mental health.
You get to see how good a typist I am too. So there's all sorts of stresses today. Other comments?
Other comments on the strengths from the SWOT analysis that we did last 16 months ago. I'm going to add that, you know, under lifestyle, it proved to me that, you know, kind of the opposite of what Dan said, because I mean, I always thought it was great we had lake access and it was great we had Lake Simcoe, but I didn't realize that everybody else thought it was so special too. So we've got communities around us like Bradford and Essa and Springwater who are landlocked, who, you know, depend on us to supply them with that. And we saw by the numbers of people that flocked here, and to all, not just here, I mean, it was everywhere from Wawa to Sauble Beach. It made me feel how lucky we are to have these assets in our community, and that we take for granted that other people don't have access to. Alex? You're on mute, Alex.
Thank you. Did we find out that we don't have enough access to lakefront for residents? You know, is Innisfil limited to that access because a lot of it is privately owned? So did we learn that?
Okay.
Anyone else on strengths?
There's actually a second slide of strengths as well. These are attributes of the corporation of the town of Innisfil rather than attributes of the place. So I should probably move the one about you being nimble over to this page. But other thoughts on this?
Kenneth?
When it comes to strong finances, there was something I saw where it came to the revenue due to COVID. No, I'm sorry, my brain decided to shut off mid-sentence there. With Uber, it actually saved us the cost of transit in the long run. So that actually something being innovative worked in our favor in this particular time.
Yeah, you're right, Kenneth. It was probably, it was a blessing. We went the opposite everybody else did when they were suffering severe losses from our transit. We were saving money, and yet we still got, maybe I shouldn't say that out loud, but we still got transit recovery money from the province as well. Others? Alex?
I would just question on the bottom there, it says no mega projects pending. For Innisfil, would we consider the Orbit a mega project? Or the Innisfil lands, Highway 400 lands, you know, consider the amount of money that's that in terms of the Innisfil Heights is going to be a big project if we can push that through. So I'm just wondering when that statement is true.
Yeah, it's a good point. Others?
Madam Mayor, one thought I had was with regard to the casino revenue. I guess like all hospitality organizations, they may not be doing quite as well now or over time. And I wondered if that was in any way at risk.
It's definitely at risk. The host municipality group just met last week, and you know, it could be some time before we see any revenue that we've, but one of the, I guess, under the strong finances, the good part is we don't spend it till we get it in the bank. So yes, it is an issue, but it's not an issue like Mayor Diodati has in Niagara Falls. It's not, it doesn't form part of our revenue that we need to run our town. It's used on projects, special projects and capital projects. Whereas other communities rely on the casino money to turn their lights on and plow their roads. We don't do that. But you're right, it still is, it's still going to be an issue. I think the reputation for innovation, particularly now, because we're seen as a leader, will do us well with our, we are now a partner with Ryerson DMZ. We did a Hack the Curve hackathon for municipal COVID problems. And we just opened up an accelerator space. So when we had issues with the boat, you know, crowded boat launches and worried how that was going to work with COVID, we had one of our own tech startups develop a boat launch app within a week.
That's really interesting. That really goes to that digital revolution point that's making.
And we've now started something called GovTech, which is looking at accelerator startups for government, techie government issues, as because all municipal governments now, and actually all levels of government, including the provincial justice system, will be looking at ways to innovate their processes. And so we're going to have a special section of our accelerator just looking at government technical issues.
Anything else?
We all had a tour of the new accelerator space this week, so that's why that's all in my head right now. Anyone else?
Okay. I will jump ahead. These are weaknesses in relation to attributes of Innisfil. There's another page that was weaknesses of the corporation. So, any thoughts here?
Kevin?
Yeah, if I could jump in, what I see as a weakness as we transform from a rural, and maybe it's in here, as we transform from a rural to an urban focused town, the roads that we're changing from 2-lane to 4-lane, there's quite a long list of infrastructure that needs to catch up, and it's a hindrance for commuters. It's a hindrance for the rural part of our town as well, as we try to do our daily tasks and have to deal with those issues.
Is it like the poor performance of the roads while the 4-laning is going on, or like, so is it like a construction burden, or is it the cost burden, or is it like we haven't got it done yet, so it's jammed with traffic? Is it all those things?
So the increase in population has occurred before the roads can handle it.
Okay.
And that's not necessarily the town at dealing with that. It's the county and the province, but it ultimately our residents have to deal with that.
Okay.
If you go down Innisfil Beach Road now, there's about hundreds of pylons that our farm tractors will be knocking over every day. So
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else? Donna? You're on mute, Donna.
Sorry, not sure how to word this, but just thinking of the downtown Alcona, which I think it's been about probably 12 years since it was designed with the islands by council and this vision. And it's taking too long and deteriorating before that vision happens. So I think it makes it difficult to understand the vision, to see it, and possibly change, revisiting it.
There's no such thing as an answer which is too long in the world of the virtual sticky.
Yes.
You're going to get to like these better than the regular ones.
I'll still miss you as people, but I will not miss this.
So Donna, can I just ask, is that to the no center to Innisfil comment? Is that attached to that? Downtown Alcona is kind of the downtown, right?
Yes, yes. You know, because it's a comment that people make, and you know, there was this vision that the previous council started working on, I think about 3 terms ago, from the 20th to the lake. You don't see it, it's not happening. There's still, you know, there's a lot of inquiries, but it creates a lack of trust by the residents in what we're doing, and probably frustration. Yeah.
Carolyn.
Yeah, well, you guys are innovative in spelling too, aren't you?
Carolyn, you're on mute.
Just sort of add additional comments to Councillor or to Donna. Downtown Alcona or downtown Innisfil, we really don't have a downtown section. It's boring, and it's very boring. When I go up to Aurelia, so I can enjoy the stores and the walking and just seeing different people go back and forth. That's something that we need in downtown Alcona. We don't have any clothing stores. There's very few restaurants that you can just go in and grab something quick and then come back out. There's just nothing of interest in Alcona, and I think we really have to delve into what kind of stores we can have that will attract people to come to Innisfil. And on the way down to the beach, they can stop and they shop, and then they'll go to the beach, they'll come back. We really need to look at what we can get to make Innisfil interesting again. That's just my comment.
Alex.
To go along with that, what are we not doing right as a municipality in terms of encouraging to go? So I think what Donna's reflecting is that people are disappointed in that we had a vision and it's taking so long to implement. Why is it taking so long for some of these developments to get into the ground? We've had that condominium complex at the corner across from Sobeys that been promising for years, and it's still just a placard that sits there. So I think people would be more energetic, more enthusiastic if they saw things changing along that stretch, but they're not. So are we doing something as a municipality in terms of is there red tape which is stopping these developments from happening, or is there something that we can be doing to help developers. I remember there was one development who had an issue of environmental concerns. I'm not too sure if it was the one across from Sobeys or another one. It was around stormwater management on it. Is there anything that we can do to help these companies move their development along faster so that they get done, so they're just not signs on the street? So I think I share that frustration with Donna, that, you know, the development's taking a long time, and I think that's part of the reason we see frustration in the residents in terms of not having confidence that we can have the downtown that we talk about.
Thank you. That's good. Can I go back to the tourism not necessarily welcome? That has been exacerbated with COVID. There's almost an unhealthy hatred of people who look like they don't belong here. I'm getting videos on my Facebook messaging feed, people following people on their phone, carrying coolers into the park. It's gotten almost vigilante in some cases, and definitely it's not just Innisfil. Again, it's across the country. I know people with Vermont license plates in Muskoka and their car gets egged, or people with the US license plates who use Alaska to get through BC were getting harassed. So it isn't just Innisfil, but it's become an open wound. Before, it was just kind of like festering a little under the surface. It is now an open wound, and the people in Innisfil don't want those people here, and those people are angry at Innisfil, and I get 6 emails every Monday morning saying, don't you ever come to Toronto because you wouldn't let me launch my boat. And this all, John, comes from the fact that we had resident only parking in the beaches during the because the emergency's still on. And it really caused a divide. Alex?
Just to go along with that, is that I've seen 2 cars that had out-of-state plates on them, and they posted in their back window stating that they had done their 2-week quarantine, and they are either a resident of Ontario or had been a resident of Ontario and were coming back. So they're actually posting these signs in their car because they're fearful their cars are going to be vandalized by people. So I've, in the past 2 weeks, I've seen 2 cars with those signs in the back of their back windshield.
Anyone else? Kevin?
Looking at the list where it says no center to Innisfil and little common identity, I think that should be highlighted, that as we try to develop a downtown or develop a more urban community, we struggle to find those anchors that allow us to express to other people who we are, because we don't have that waterfront downtown that Aurelia has, or other places. So I would just maybe echo that one again.
Madam Mayor, I wondered, it's interesting that addictions and opioids was identified, but I guess, mental health and addictions usually go together. I guess the mental health side would sort of have grown in parallel with the addiction side as a result of the last year.
On that
You're
addiction.
muted, Your Worship.
Sorry, Bill, did you have a comment? Sorry.
Yeah, just with the downtown, I think one of the problems is why people are, turned off is if you take a look at the old walk-up house sitting there for 3 years, and we've been promising, we're going to do something with it, going to do something with it. It's come to council several times, and we've looked at it and we've approved things, and then, they're changed. So I think that's one of the problems, that we are pretty strict in what we do, and we hold back when we should be encouraging, projects such as that, because those are the gaps that fill in the downtown area. And they're just taking forever and a day, just like that placard sitting there that we're going to build the condominium across from Sobeys. Those are all things that I think we can do, that we can help to move along and build a downtown. I agree with a lot of the comments being said. And I agree with a lot of the people that are not happy about what's happening in downtown Alcona. I'm not very happy because, we have Canadian Tire way on one end and we got Sobeys at the other end. We got half a mile of houses in between. That does not make it attractive downtown. Those are things that we have to look at if you're going in the future, if you're going to, make a walkable, presentable downtown. That's what Aurelia has. That's what Barrie has. That's what Bradford has. But we don't have that. And that's one of our downfalls. That's my comment.
Thank you. Kenneth?
Actually, I was thinking different on a different topic.
Yeah, go ahead, but you're a little bit frozen.
Altogether, the seniors, one thing that the town has done considerably is adapted when it came to the seniors. Okay, sorry. What it appears to be is that with the aging population, there's not enough senior services.
Okay, I think we got you.
The Innisfil Public Library and Idea Lab has stepped up, looking to relocate services and whatnot to go out to locations like population in that regard. I think that. Okay, do I continue or not?
Yeah, you can. Maybe try turning off your video and seeing if that helps.
All right. Give me 1 second here. I'll just. I'm saying that when it came down to it, when the crisis hit and the seniors were isolated more so, they were doing the calls, they were bringing services to them and what the case may be. So like in this scenario, it's forced us to address the issue with the senior services, how we've tried to adapt so that even when this passes, we still have items and tools in place to assist them as it progresses.
Thanks, Kenneth. Donna?
Thank you. Just one thing as I'm listening to all this, and it seems to all be directed to downtown Alcona concerns. But I think one of our weaknesses is that we need to look to remember that there's many other areas of Innisfil that also need some influx of infrastructure and services to the residents that are living in those areas. So we have to think outside the box. Yes, build your downtown core, but don't forget at the same time that we can't drain everything and just from the purse feed one area. We have to look at how we're going to support seniors, how we're going to support the youth in other areas. And maybe it's, as in previous years ago, from planning, taking a look at the attributes of the different areas of Innisfil, Guildford, Lefroy, Cookstown, etc., for what each can offer and focus on those as well.
Thank you. Rob?
Thanks, Lynn. I'm sitting here listening, and I'm wondering about this weakness of the downtown, Alcona downtown, without looking at reconsideration, where else staff brought us a vision not so long ago to this council, There were, there was a report on the Innisfil Beach Park, how to make a destination from the 25th Side Road to revitalize the entire downtown, to make it a not a boring place, as Carolyn said. I wonder if the weakness is possibly this council not having the vision to work through that, rather than, just that there isn't a downtown, or there's parts of the downtown that aren't completed, or they haven't come back together. So I question whether these are really weaknesses of a downtown, or is just council didn't feel strongly enough in the vision to create that destination. So just a comment that I don't know that the 3 or 4 yellow boxes that all talk about downtown and boring and whatever else may not be quite as relevant as they are. Thank you.
Thanks. Donna?
Not to get into a debate, but just sharing from a different perspective, Rob, that I think it's also, yes, staff have this vision, they shared a vision, but when that vision impacts and changes a residential neighborhood, I think that's when council questions it. And so I think that that's what we have to look at, is that when we need to revisit that vision? Can it be modified, changed, or how can it work for everyone?
So you can see we've hit on a sore point here, John, and I'm not sure now we're still talking about the effects of COVID on our strat plan, because I don't know if COVID even affected any of these things we're talking about. Any other comments on the weaknesses page? I saw Rob, then Alex. No, just Alex.
Okay. Thank you. 2 points I'd like to make is, one is that because we're such a small municipality, going ahead with projects like the Highway 400 Innisfil development in terms of getting water and sewer over there is a real issue. I think last time I heard it was $140 million to get something over there. I have yet to hear of the alternative solution that we originally talked about. So I think one of the weaknesses is because we're a smaller municipality, how do we make something like that happen without financially burdening the residents of Innisfil, who are spread out all over the place? And one of the reasons these costs are so expensive is because we are a big municipality land base, but small in terms of population.
Thank you. Bill?
Just one comment follow-up. I think some of these things have to do with COVID, because the first 3 or 4 months of COVID, all construction was stopped, everything was stopped, so nothing happened. So everything has been on delay for a little while, and now it's starting to move again. Didn't matter how good the planning was. If you couldn't do building, then it wasn't going to happen. So COVID did have some effect on these things.
Thank you. Anyone else? Donna?
Just following on Bill's comment, I agree with that, because I think we've heard a lot about how people are changing the way they work, no longer going to the city, but working from home. Also looking at how COVID has impacted the commercial sector, businesses that can't survive, the clothing store, the restaurants that are closing, because if they can't get the customers because of COVID, they can't survive, and they can't survive with the 50% service. So I think we need to look at how that will change, looking at a business downtown corridor with that in mind.
Alex?
I think one of the biggest changes I've noticed, I've only been on council for 2 years, but I know when we started, I think COVID has had a real impact in terms of how we view our future. I thought when we first started out, everyone was very, very hopeful, and thought that Innisfil had a very, very prosperous future, and that we were all, I thought we were engaged at the first 2 years. As soon as COVID hit, I've noticed a lot more negativity in terms of our future. And so I think we've become a little more timid in terms of what we're willing to go ahead with, or I think we're tempering what we hope for the future. So I think for me, the biggest impact has been on people's mental state in terms of how they perceive the future. This is not something that none of us have dealt with in our generations, and so I think it's kind of set us back on our heels a little bit. And I'm waiting for us to get back on our toes again and moving forward. I think that's the way growth happens, optimism. So I'm hoping to see that again before this council ends.
And can I ask a question there, Alex? Do you think that has anything to do with this type of virtual meeting versus, like, I sense that lack of team that we had in the beginning. And that was actually one of the first bullets that we came up with on our very first slide of SWOT. Our strengths was, you know, a good, strong council with a good, strong vision, and that I'm wondering, does anybody think part of that is because of these virtual meetings? Not that we can do anything about that, but Donna?
Yes, not afraid to speak up. I think it has. I think it's fractured council. We have no opportunity to meet, to collaborate, to build a team, and to build your customers. Your customers are each other. So what we're getting is we've gone from council meetings that are every other week to meetings every single week, prepping for those meetings, all virtual. You're spending a lot of time on the computer, prepping, getting all your information. It does a lot to your mental health, to your well-being, and to frustration. And we haven't had a break. We've had no break. We've just been going, going, going. And the ever-ready bunny really needs some new batteries, and we need a break. We need a team-building exercise. And this COVID is not only hard on our residents, but it's hard on council too. And I'm not the only one who feels this way, but I'll be the first to speak up. And I think it does fracture. And I think it's gonna, if we don't find a way to build ourselves back up, then you're gonna have a lot more, debates on council in the future.
And I mean, far be it from me to curtail debate. I love a good debate. I mean, and we have to keep that going. But I think you're right. I think it's at the same time, we also have to set an example for the rest of the staff, our employees. And you know, so following the rules is definitely among one of those, because if we were to do a team building exercise, then why shouldn't planning, and why shouldn't finance, and why shouldn't, and you know, we could get ourselves into a lot of trouble doing that. Councillor Waters, or sorry, Alex.
I think we're known for our innovation. And I was sitting at Friday Harbor having a nice coffee, and who walks up 6 feet a distance from me is Carolyn. And it was so nice to be able to see her in person and chat with her. And also when we went to Popeyes and we actually saw each other in person. And we did get a little close, and I was a little bit nervous about that. But it felt so nice to be able to see people in person, because it just has it invigorates me and makes me feel hopeful. So I think the virtual allows us to get business done, but it certainly doesn't make it enjoyable.
Good comments, Kenneth.
I agree with everybody. Before the COVID situation occurred, everyone was busy looking into their phones and trying to disconnect from those around them in their own little manner. Now we've been forced to be online so long that sitting down and looking someone in the face is considered a treat these days. It's the human connection that we're missing. And when we used to go out to events together, we would sit, we would rub shoulders, sort of idea, and you know, we'd relax and just be together. Now that limitation has put us, it's kind of segregated everybody in their own little bubble. And I agree, it does put a strain, because you don't get to sit and, you know, as they say, most of our language is nonverbal, so you don't get to pick up on those little cues when you're talking through text.
Good. Any other questions on I knew we'd spend more time on our weaknesses than our strengths.
That's always the case. And in fact, you know, what you were just saying collectively about the stresses of doing work in this fashion. You know, I think I'm working in 20 or 25 different municipalities right now. Everybody says the same thing. And I think it was really well put. The virtual lets you get the business done, but by stripping out the human element, everybody who is in the business of government is attracted to it because they're people, and so you get all the burdens and you lose a lot of what's most pleasurable about it. And I think it's a very wise comment that you lose the human signals that really make communication a lot more comfortable and easy. I wouldn't want anybody to think that what you're talking about is out of norm for every other municipal council across the province, because it's what your sorts of things that you're sharing are what people are sharing everywhere I've been.
Thanks, John. And like, yes, I agree, we need a break. The issue became, and we had a lot of discussion about this, the perception of the public when we're in a state of emergency and all of a sudden we go, guess what? We're taking off for a month. You're on your own, people. But at the same time, as I know the staff team has been doing, encouraging everybody. Like I know, Donna, you managed to take a week or two off and just like turn off. So you didn't? I thought you tried to, but maybe you didn't get to. Yeah, okay.
I tried, and then there was an emergency meeting, and then there was a tree clearing issue in my ward that I had to handle, so it didn't work.
Didn't work. I know it's hard, but maybe we made the wrong decision, but we were worried about the pushback from the public on, us deciding we were going to take a month off when we're in a state of emergency. Yeah. I don't think there's a right. I think either way we're wrong, right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is it's a part-time role, and congratulations, it became a full-time role, and that's what an emergency is all about. If no one's thanked you for that lately, maybe I can. Or maybe I can apologize on behalf of all the annoying Toronto people who came up and put stress on your facilities, and you can ceremonially say, yes, that's why we jolly well made you stay in Toronto with your digital yellow stickies today. But I think everything that you're saying is all very, very understandable. I just wonder if it's worth taking a look at this. Like, you've spent a little more time on this than we anticipated, but like however much time you spend on it is exactly as much time as you should spend on it. So there were some opportunities here that you'd identified, a lot of which found their way into the plan. So, some of them may not be as immediate as they were. They might feel like they'll take a little longer. But are there any new opportunities that you think might be added here?
Alex.
I think there are. I think, the province wants to see economic growth. They want to see us get back on track. And so I think if Innisfil can come up with some innovative developments or innovative programs that show that we want to get, this municipality up and running again, that there might be some cash right away. I agree with John in terms of, down the road, somebody has to pay the piper for all the money that's being spent. But I think right now is if Innisfil has some good projects or programs that we can launch that really, I think, spur economic growth. And I think development in terms of houses, like real estate right now is kind of booming in Toronto and the surrounding areas. Well, it's not booming, but it's certainly growing. Getting, if there are any developments coming through, that we should find some way of fast tracking them to get them as long as they're they're not environmentally damaging. So I think there's a great opportunity here for Innisfil to show its innovation and nimbleness to be able to turn this around and get maybe some of that cash will help get some of these developments moving and also move economic prosperity through Innisfil.
Stimulus funding for sure. Dan.
Thank you. I think one of the opportunities we have is with this orbit, if we were to reach out to the development community and say, hey, this is something new we're doing, and it ties in with a lot of the mental issues and economic issues that are going on today, is to make affordable housing. And I don't mean subsidized housing so much as affordable housing for millennials, first-time buyers. they're buying condos in Toronto, 500 square feet, 600 square feet, $1 million. If we could attract them to Innisfil with an 800 square foot unit, $400,000 to $500,000, they use the GO train, get up to Innisfil, get them into the municipality, give them hope, give them some belief that they can own a home one day more than a shoebox. We have that opportunity with the development and just say, like, work with us. Let's work with the province in creating a construction boom to create jobs, get the economy going. But let's not all look at the average house in Innisfil. I think in your report today was 673,000. Barrie was 633. And you add the taxes and upkeep to a home like that, first-time buyers, it's just not affordable for them. So if the Orbit's going to be successful, I think it has to look at the youth and giving them opportunities, giving them hope to own a home. And I think that in itself is everybody's goal. Everybody's home is their castle. And I think that we could give that opportunity, reach out, and also reach out to the province. I remember back in the mid 80s to late 80s, you could buy up in Timberwalk with the rent to own option. And I think that's something we may have to bring back to society, to Ontario, to make it affordable for our young people to have a dream. And I think when you have a dream, you have a purpose. If you have a purpose, you're not dealing with the opioids, you're not dealing with the other drugs that are out there, you're not doing a crime. So I think it's a circle that we need to maybe look at for first-time buyers, millennials. Let's find something to work with that age group to give them a future. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. If I can wordsmith just a bit, I think what you're describing isn't affordable, but attainable. That's the verbiage used for it. Like when affordable, usually it means subsidized, and you're looking more attainable versus affordable.
Attainable housing.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I saw a bunch of hands there. Kenneth?
One thing that an opportunity that COVID has given us, and I fully support this after the DMZ tour this week, is YD all across Canada and the US needs to step into to adapt with. We're giving them a hub. We're giving them a space to fill the void of the new requirements that are being put in place by the COVID by how we restrictions. So I think by giving that opportunity and getting people up here to help build their business and bring their families, we have the immediate impact in our community, but it has a nationwide impact if it really, really takes off. And I think that's something that we're doing right, and I fully support and throw my weight behind.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. And I think just, on the last bullet here about the community engagement, I think COVID has allowed us to look at different methods of strengthening our relationship with the community, of finding new ways to get them engaged, having the virtual meetings. There's more people attending, logging in and attending those. I think it strengthens and improves the communication between the town and the residents. So I see that, and as staff in the library are looking at different methods of how they can support residents, I think it's only going to make us a stronger, better community.
Yeah, I can support that thought for sure. Another opportunity might be the welcome wagon is now gone. Could we start an Innisfil welcome wagon that we did hear during the Orbit roundtable that I think it was a person in Sleeping Lion, and they lived there, not long, and they said, I don't feel part of, I'm not part of Alcona, I'm not part of Behaviour. I'm, I don't feel like nobody knocked on my door and said, welcome, brought me a banana bread. Like I didn't feel like I belong. So that's one opportunity. The other opportunity that just landed on our lap, one of our biggest challenges was 82% of our people who went to work left the community every day. Well, overnight that changed. So we were able to knock that number down. I don't know by how much, but it's significant. And, you know, the more people that are working at home, they're not going to Starbucks in, you know, down at the TD Center. They're going to Starbucks in Alcona on their lunch break or their break. So all those people that are staying home are spending money in their own community. No more hands?
Sorry.
Alex?
Yeah, I was just thinking along with the development and the opportunities that presents right now, is there an opportunity, and we may have already done this, but in terms of streamlining our processes to help these developments get through faster in terms of, you know, whether we're talking about downtown Alcona or we're talking about subdivisions or developments in Lefroy or Cookstown, is there a way of looking at our streamlining all this so things happen faster and people can see change happening sooner and keeps them a little more positive?
Thank you. Anyone else with opportunity? Kevin?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe along that lines, you know, we as a municipality through planning and everything else try to put things in place to get to something we hope that will happen, whether it's a downtown or if I think of Bill's example of the walk-up house. Like, are there levers that we can use, stronger levers, whether it's a carrot or a stick? We can figure that one out so that those things go the way we want them to go. It's difficult when we don't own the land, but maybe there are more innovative ways where, you know, that the walk-up house isn't sitting there for years and years and years, and whatever tact we take, that those things don't last that long to upgrade our how we see ourselves, or that all that vacant land around the proposed downtown, you know, those people that own that, is there a way that we can get to the goals that we want as a community?
Thanks, Kevin. Anyone else? Okay, threats. What has changed since COVID?
So the review of Simcoe County obviously ended with a fizzle.
Yay.
The growth targets changed. Have your coyotes become emboldened?
I haven't heard much about coyotes lately. On the review of Simcoe County, it hasn't quite gone away, John. It's still county council's decided, you know, they still want to do something internally, but it's really it's very difficult to make these things happen when you don't have a gun to your head.
Yeah.
So it's still there, but it's not a threat.
My guess is that guns will be drawn again, but not for a few years.
Good to know. Other threats, Carolyn?
Just to let you know that in Sandy Cove, and here we are, Sandy Cove again, and I'm not sure why they're coming in so quickly or so pretty much every day. We've had a few pets that were killed by the coyotes just on our streets in Sandy Cove. And I think it's possibly because of the building that's going on Mapleview in Barrie. Like, they've taken a lot of the bushes and trees away, and it's bringing them sort of down our way because we do have the bushes behind us. So we are really getting a lot of influx of coyotes in Sandy Cove. So even just walking on our own without a pet, it's getting a little uncomfortable. So it is happening, and I hopefully they'll go away for the winter. Not sure how they do, but anyway, we do still have them.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I trying to show you a picture of a wolf and a coyote. Complaints I've had that they were standing in the front door, and one resident found the cat's head laying on the front door.
Oh.
So they're still around. And, you know, I've been getting complaints about, I don't know, once a week about people seeing them close to their houses. I guess they're coming out with what's happening on the 6th line there. So they're still around.
I saw in the paper last week in Sunnydale Park and Barrie, they were having the same issue. Donna?
Just in looking at the growth area that's listed in this SWOT analysis, the risk of growing too fast, I think the impact of COVID is the risk of attracting growth and development. And how do we do that in, you know, financial restraint economy?
Okay, Bill?
I think one of the threats of COVID is too, you know, that the price of real estate is going to go way up because lumber and all building materials in the last 3 months have gone up anywhere from 70 to 125%. And that is the cause of COVID because of mills and have shut down literally, you know, because there were outbreaks. And I think that's going to come back and, you know, cost whoever's buying houses and whoever wants to do anything, that's going to slow down literally because the material isn't available. And when it is available, it costs you twice as much as it was pre-COVID. So, you know, I think that's going to be a bit of a problem too.
Other threats that have emerged. Kevin and then Alex.
Yeah, I know over the last little while, as a result of COVID, staff have been very transparent with our economic threats, where you know, this council has promised a 0% tax increase next year, and so there's a lot of choices that this council will have to make during budget time. And that's going to affect our residents and in a big way, and that's a huge threat, I think, in the short term.
Alex?
Two things. I think with the new provincial minimums in terms of population growth, I think that exacerbates the problem with growth in Barrie in terms of if they're going to grow to the new numbers that they have, that I think that's going to put further pressure on them to seek more land to their southern neighbor. So I think that threat increases. I think the second thing is that COVID itself, we don't know what's going to happen. They talk about a second wave, and if the vaccines don't work out, that threat is going to be lingering, and it's going to throw more doubt into prosperity. In it right now, I think we're rebounding back a bit, but if this doesn't resolve itself within the next 6 months to a year and a half, is that I think the lingering impact of that is going to be huge.
Yeah, good point. What about defunding the police? Is that a threat or an opportunity? I see for us, it's a threat only because I get, you know, 6 to 7 emails a day asking how come there's not more police? How come there's not a policeman doing radar on my street? How come there's not a policeman, you know, stopping the person who jaywalked in front of my house? So that I think is something that's evolved since the last time we sat together. And then if I could go back to the opportunities, am I allowed to do that, John? One I missed was the Black Lives Matter movement and the ability for us to to think differently, and we're the town, council gave staff direction to create an inclusivity policy, and so I think that provides us with some good opportunity just to do things differently. Anyone else?
I know people may not be mentioning it because it was part of the staff presentations, but I think probably given the concern that came out of the community, you'd probably want us to just capture on this page the access to high speed and because it's such a big problem now, both from the point of view of business and also people trying to school their kids at home and all that sort of thing. So you get a digital divide there, and also the potential spike in demand for mental health services that was mentioned, and then also the economic security piece. So I know people may not have been keen to mention those because they were already covered, but they probably belong.
Great, thank you.
Any other issues that you think belong on these sheets? Because the next step, Madam Mayor and members of council, is I think you've taken a pretty good stock. I think the summary of this is that there's definitely been some stresses. There have been stresses on human interaction, and a lot of people putting a lot of sweat in to try and help out a lot of people in this sort of spirit of we're all in this together. But it has a cost, and people are tired. There's a lot of need and demand out there for services, some of which are going to be difficult to turn around immediately, like access to high speed, or others of which are longer term projects, but other things that people have been able to address more quickly. Everything that was fundamentally strong about the place before is still fundamentally strong about the place. And it could be that you've got, that old Chinese curse of living in interesting times. And, well, we wanted to grow at our pace. And it could be that there's a sort of ready or not, the market's going to come and tell you to grow, potentially a little faster than you want. And yet there's also a lot of appetite for growing fast. But I think, it's not fast, it's fast and well, and fast and consistent with your vision, but make it happen. So I hear that loud and clear. There's obviously a lot of comment about the downtown, and perhaps not a full consensus on everything that should be done there, but I don't know if the strategic plan needs to sort of capture that so much as your master plan. But so I think it's a really interesting balance between the things that are new and the things that were the same before. The next step would be to move into the review of the 11 sections of your community strategic plan having regard to this. I'm told that it might be expedient to give folks a break for a few minutes on a call like this, but I don't know what your practice is in terms of, but this would be the right time to do it. Otherwise, we can plow ahead.
Council, do you need a few minutes? Yes, Alex? You saying yes? Okay. Yes, okay. So it's 3:18. Can we, is 3:30, is that too long? 3:25? 5 minutes. Okay, so we'll say 3:25. Okay. Okay, I think we're ready whenever you are, John.
Great. Well, just a quick check-in. Is this format working okay for people so far? You can hear okay? Good. Well, thank you for your active participation in it. It's great. It's going to stress our time available to some degree, because you had a lot to say about the SWOT, and that's terrific. We have the whole strategic plan to get through, and we have about an hour to do it in. What I'm going to suggest is this. I had a couple of slides that just reminded you about a couple of things. One is that the horizon of the plan is 2030, so it's not what we can achieve in the next 12 months, and it's not what we must achieve in the next 12 months. It's the degree to which it fits our long-term strategy. The second thing is there's more to life than just having a program or hiring a staff to do it. You get to think about the whole suite of tools. And these days, leading or convening or advocating or regulating are just as important as actually spending money by delivering or investing. And so, the fact that an idea seems difficult because it might be expensive doesn't have to be if you're down here on the advocate for the province to do it. That's, one of life's affordable luxuries is advocating that the province do something. It doesn't have to be the full-blown Innisfil to take responsibility and deliver. The other thing to bear in mind, as you know, is that the community strategic plan really is the high-level document, and then you've got the more detailed ones. So we don't have to have all the detail here, but it could be that there's a detail that just doesn't fit under any of these 11 things, and that might be a reason to rethink the document. I'm going to suggest, I think like we did last time, that though the vision and the mission and the guiding values come first, I'm going to suggest that we leave them to the end, because it's less about specifics and more about a kind of a great summary. And it's always easier to think about that after you've thought about everything else. Although obviously you're very interested in any comments that people have in it, but I'm going to suggest we leave that to the end. But you can, of course, on your own copy of this that I think you all have in PDF form or whatever, you can certainly look at it, while we're talking about other things. The strategic goals, I know you're familiar with. You've got it organized by the 3 pillars of grow, connect, and sustain. And so let me jump into, there's basically, the pattern I've followed for each one of these is, here are your 3 strategic objectives under grow. I give them to you once so you can see how the 3 fit together. And then there's a page on each one. So here's 1.1, and then 1.2 and 1.3. The other thing you should see is that I pre-populated it with a few community and staff thought starters. These have no status other than I was trying to keep track of all the different staff reports and things that you've been provided about different consultations and such. And I was trying to keep track for myself to some degree because I thought it might be helpful for me to just stick some of them on the side of the page. They have no status other than the fact that I read them in one of your reports and I stuck them on the side of the page. I don't think they're comprehensive, so they're not intended to be annoying, but I was just trying to make it easier to connect the dots about where things that you heard in either of the earlier presentations from staff, where those things might fit into these things if you were to consider them. So that was really just for convenience rather than anything else. So please don't read those the wrong way. And the other thing you should know is that the ones that are pink were ones that came out of different staff suggestions through a sort of a broad staff survey. The ones that are blue are the ones that came out of the community. And in some cases, they're blue with a line around it. That means that they came out of both. But I wouldn't get too fussed about that. They're just there as thought starters for you. So if perhaps I settle on this slide for a second, which is the first of the 3. Your first one is planning for and managing growth. The second is promoting economic development. And the third is improving your service offerings around new programming. And perhaps I can go to the next slide for any comments that people may have about things that you think might fit under or thought waves that you have around planning for and managing growth. And you can assume that if you've mentioned it before in the SWOT, that in my report, I'll bring those things forward where they're relevant. So we can probably focus on things that haven't been said. But if everything's been said, I don't want you to be silent for the next hour. So we'll just see how it goes. The first one is we will follow a planned approach to growing the town and developing amenities while balancing urban, rural, and agricultural spaces. We'll urbanize densely within designated areas, preserve and protect green spaces, and respect and maintain agricultural land. So any thoughts about how the last 18 months may have affected this?
Kevin?
Were we saying there developing amenities, and we talk about, as a community, we like to have a downtown, or we like to have a place to have a coffee or a nice meal. Like, we're not the people that, at least I haven't heard this council saying we want to be in the restaurant business or we want to be in the coffee shop business. So is that a fair statement to say that we are developing these things? I guess the next step would be, how do we further encourage those amenities if we aren't going to actively participate in bringing them forward?
So that's one thing where your director of planning may be able to help, but I'd understood that to mean that you'd actively develop public amenities, and then you'd create policies and frameworks that would simply encourage the private sector stuff, like you're saying, because obviously you're never going to be in the business of
right. I guess we have been developing amenities when it comes to rec centers and libraries and parks and stuff like that. So
yeah.
I guess that's where I would question what do we mean by that?
Well, I think they also mean things like in your master planning, making sure that you've got a combination of modes of active transportation, so within the orbit and that kind of thing, or the kinds of sidewalks that people want to use. I know one of the councils, I'm sorry, I'm just such a tourist here today, I don't remember the names, but I was talking about the desirability of having a nice walkable space between the anchors of Sobeys and Canadian Tire in your downtown. So those are the sorts of public realm amenities that they often refer to, but
The Civic Square might be a good example. Bill?
Thank you, Your Worship. Lynn. I look at the respect and maintain agricultural land. How do we do that when developers come along and pay $100,000 an acre for agricultural land, plant a sign on that says, future development coming? It's pretty hard for a farmer to resist, the money that's being offered for, any agricultural land, any land these days. And I just wonder how, for us to respect it is one thing, but for the owners of the land, it's pretty hard to respect when they're, all of a sudden offering a bundle and they don't have to work anymore the rest of their lives. I just wonder how we do that. Maybe Kevin can answer that.
I think it's just about, sorry, Kevin, I just think it's about having good, strong planning policies, and that, developers know when they buy the property, if it's not in a settlement area, that's nothing's happening for their lifetime. Kevin?
I guess what I have thought about that somewhat. Do we how do we discourage speculation? And that's maybe hard to do on the agricultural land side, because they can see Innisfil expanding. So it's very difficult because it's not a secondary plan a piece of land. So, but perhaps those people who are speculating in the settlement area, and we see this as we talk about our downtowns with the sign saying, you know, coming soon, and it soon is years and years away. Is there a way for us to discourage that? Can we, you know, tax them if they just sit on it because their values are going up anyway? Like, are there, how do we do that? How do we, there should be a way to get the speculators into developers so that we don't have these spaces of vacant land and things are developed the way we want them to.
Thank
I
you.
mean, to some degree, we're looking for gaps rather than plans for implementation. And so I don't want to encourage us to get too deep into a lot of these findings for the answers today, because honestly, the question that you've just asked is one that vexes councils anywhere where there's agricultural land. But as long as people are generally agreeing that we should respect and maintain agricultural land, then it's over to our friend, the director of planning, to figure out how to do that and come back with a plan wrapped up in a bow for you in due course. But what we're really looking for is gaps in the plan.
So to me, the whole thing is that the speculation piece. How do we deal with that?
And that was my question.
Yeah.
So, Tim?
So, Your Worship, you know, I think probably the best thing to do, given the time and the level of detail some of these inquiries, like I'm more than happy to address that, and you know, certainly clear policies and incentives can do that. But you know, probably the best thing to do is just consolidate all the questions today, and then you know, the team can figure out the best way to communicate that back to council or incorporate that into the findings of the update.
So the question's logged as being a good and fair one.
Great. Other gaps in the, Donna?
Not really a gap, but I guess, you know, we're looking at this for 2030. When you say a planned approach, do we need to question the plan that we looked at before? Is it still relevant today for the next 10 years, given the, you know, changes with COVID and how we will view the future?
Any other comments on this point?
So I can move ahead to the next, and people are welcome to direct me back, because I think you'll find there's a certain amount of interrelatedness in some of these. Second one, 1.2 relates to promoting economic development. And of course, at the time you wrote this, I think you were concerned about growth, because I don't think any of us were planning the world's greatest recession to happen within 16 months of the writing of the plan. So this was focusing on developing policies and strategies and approaches to develop a new modern economy, to create well-paying jobs for our citizens, and a more diversified commercial and tax base. So any comments on this?
Kenneth?
I think with the expansion of the economic lands that we've recently got, it allows us to focus on that a little better. Because now, instead of saying when and if we get the additional lands, we now have the lands, and our job is to figure out how we're going to best utilize them to the benefit of all the residents.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Do we need to talk about in here the the accelerator or the startup or the, you know, creating ourselves that niche market or name of being like Riot, a DMZ.
I mean, to some degree, it comes down to the style you want to maintain in your plan. I mean, clearly, policies, strategies, and approaches is the code hook that you can hang the activities that you're doing through your operating plans of the accelerator and the DMZ. I suppose, you know, the DMZ could go out of business next Tuesday, but you could still be in the accelerator business for the next 10 years. So whether you need to identify it specifically or not, I think the significant point here is that you're focusing, that you're going to actively have policy strategies to try and create well-paying local jobs that are diversified, and that you're trying to do it both as an outcome for your municipal tax base as well as for your citizens. So it's about municipal revenues, but it's also about you know, prosperity and employment for the people of Innisfil. And it's just interesting that some of the community focus that came out of, and again, these have no status or anything, but the question was whether there were some questions or inputs were, do we need to be thinking about relief, or have the feds got that handled, or the province got that handled, or do we need to advocate for more relief? Like, is that something that's going to be a big enough feature of the next couple of years that needs to be here? And whether that relief is in the sense of direct support to business, direct support to people, or you know, whether it's in housing or whether it's in food or whether it's in childcare or whether it's in retraining. So those were some of the other thoughts, which are probably not covered by this, but that may not be stuff that you want to get into, because, you know, you'd look at this and you'd say province, you'd look at this and you'd say province and feds, you'd look at this and you'd say, okay, maybe housing, but otherwise you'd say province and feds, and you'd probably say, well, there's definitely a role here, but it would be a small dollar, heavy advocacy role. Anyway, those are just some commentary thoughts.
Bill? You're on mute, Bill. Who hasn't,
just
anyone else who hasn't done that wins a prize at the end of this. Okay, go ahead.
just to follow up on Kenny's question there in the industrial lands and that, I think our number one priority should be, you know, to ready these lands so that we can go ahead, you know, with policies of whatever goes in there. And I mean, this is something we've been working on for a lot of years. And I think that should be our number one priority, so that we can create these good paying jobs, because without readying these lands, we can't do anything with them. I mean, they've been sitting there for many years, and I know we've tossed this around and come up with 100 different ideas, but they're still there the way they were there 100 years ago. There's no services there, so I think that's our priority, to get them ready.
Well, we made great progress in the last year, just getting the you know, 16-year-old standoff with the province out of the way. So something several governments before us have not been able to do.
I totally agree. I totally agree. But I think now is the time for us to push on to get it done.
Alex?
Yeah, we talk about the new modern economy in terms of, and I'm talking about those industrial lands. You know, there's regular infrastructure, but what other infrastructure would, you know, a high tech development need in those lands in terms of, so let's not just think about sewer, water, and hydro. Are there other telecommunication systems, high-end telecommunication systems that need to go into that land to attract those types of jobs that we really want to have? So, you know, I don't know what they are, but I'm sure planning does, and so we should make sure that they are planned into that development, so that we're not getting just warehouses along Highway 400. We're getting good paying and an opportunity to go something go along with the DMZ and high tech businesses. So just to think in that general direction.
Okay.
Kenneth?
To follow up with Bill and Alex, with this moment in time, if I understand correctly, the way they're widening Innisfil Beach Road, they're going in from Yonge to the 20th as the next step. So while we have this opportunity and the space to breathe, we need to look into getting the services up there by any means. Now, the question is how. So we need a firmer vision of how we're going to be getting the water, the sewer, the electricity, the internet, whatever the case may be up there. So before they tear up Innisfil Beach Road, if we agree as a council to move forward with the extension down to the water treatment plant, for example, as opposed to the isolated systems that were presented to council, I believe it was roughly a year ago, with the filtration system and whatnot, the gray water and whatnot, that we have to have a firmer vision as to how we're going to move forward with this, because waiting till the last minute and then trying to push something through is going to blow back on everybody and could have long-term consequences.
Jason, what's our vision?
Thanks, Worship Members of Council. Just thought I'd clarify. So the master plan that was done in 2018 does include servicing of Innisfil Heights on an aggressive timeline that sees servicing out from the lake to County Road 27, ultimately with the expansion of Innisfil Beach Road. So all of that is in play. It's all underway. The county, we're marching to the county schedule in terms of their road project. So they do the intersections first, and then as you've seen, they start moving westward along Innisfil Beach Road. So I think that's in play. Although there are still some outstanding suggestions about how to do it differently, the current master plan is in play, and you'll see very soon that the funding should still be there as well. So we should be moving ahead on schedule. Thank you, Worship.
Yeah, and we want to thank the county for partnering with us. They've saved us a lot of money in this venture. Other questions or comments on this, on 1.2? Any gaps? Is affordable or attainable a gap? Do we bring that in at this point, or is that drilling down too low?
It's certainly a different policy direction than is implied in this page for economic development. But urbanized densely doesn't necessarily imply that. I mean, Director Tim would be able to give you an idea whether the concepts of affordable and attainable are in some other policy documents.
Maybe just in recognizing time, it's already described in the notes on the side, so it's been captured. Tim, anything to add?
No, other than to say that we have policies in the official plan and they're being strengthened in the orbit secondary plan as we speak.
Okay, I think I'm struggling, as is all of council. We're drilling too far down into the weeds instead of staying with that overall policy, and yeah. I apologize.
No, it's a natural problem, and honestly, this is kind of like looking through the opposite end of the telescope from which you're normally encouraged to look, because normally, everybody gets mad if as a group of decision makers we sit around and blue sky things and are all airy-fairy, because we always want to talk about something specific that we can vote yay or nay on. And unfortunately, a 10-year strategic plan is not what we usually do. So it's totally fair to say that council's, it's stretching different muscles. I think probably maybe one of the bigger strategic questions is, at some of these side thoughts over here that came out of the community consultation, whether you wanted to get more into the business of relief, whether it be thought of as being a special COVID relief program or whether it be thought of as an economic development recovery program. I think that's probably strategic, but whether it's something that you would want to do yourselves or whether it's something that you would simply want to advocate for appropriate provincial and federal resources for, and use your power of convening and leading, but stay well away of spending. I think that's a legitimate policy question to consider.
So I think in that case, advocacy is the way to go. I don't think we should be starting to, because then we get into bonusing, right? If we start with grants or financial assistance to different companies, but certainly we have been there to support. So as far as economic recovery and supporting them, you know, whether that was the expanded patios or whatever we could do quickly to help businesses, we did.
Let's regulate too. And I guess like if you convene a meeting, like economic development, where you grab everybody from the chamber and other people and you sit them in a room, that can be convening too. There's lots of leadership that you can show without opening up your wallet.
Alex?
As we move forward with the development of the orbit and looking at our industrial lands over by Highway 400, is there any opportunity to have a strategic plan around economic growth around the industries that could possibly would be associated with the orbit in terms of green buildings, sustainable technologies, all that kind of stuff? So if we want the orbit to be a sustainable place, is that there's all sorts of new prefab and panel building systems that usually like to be close to where the development is occurring. And so whether or not, you know, if we can get that development to embrace that type of development, then the industrial lands that we have might be locations where we can get companies to move to in terms of building those components. So they may start off building stuff for the orbit, but at some point in time, other communities are going to see this as an advantage and may, you know, want to use the facilities that are in Innisfil to do the same type of thing that we're doing. So is it by mirroring the industrial lands and what the orbit's doing with our overall goal to be more sustainable, is there an opportunity to have a more defined economic strategy that promotes that, or how do we lever that?
And I think that Chrystia Freeland's supposed to come up with some, you know, their way they're going to make the country recover is through green projects. So if we can identify stimulus or green projects that we could tap into any funding that way.
And I had a conversation with somebody around FCM, is that the FCM is the best way to move federal money to municipalities. And if they have a green strategy, that if we have something in play, if we have a plan here, that will look much more favorable in terms of getting that and be much more successful getting those types of projects that promote both our industrial lands and the orbit.
Okay. This one, Madam Mayor, is a big, wide open one. Like if it were, it's like a bunch of coat hooks, because you know, you're talking about that generically, it was to improve your service offerings and to add new programs or enhance what you have, deliver greater levels of service across the town. This is like a wide open door, basically, to do pretty much whatever you want. It's a little hard to talk about it in the abstract, beyond probably what you've discussed through with the SWOT, where this, of course, has more annual meaning put into it, is either through your operating plans or through your budget. And you can kind of drive a truck through this and do whatever you want, right? New programs or enhance what you already have.
I still like what it says, and I like that you can drive a truck through it, because then it can mean, you know, it doesn't put you into a box.
It certainly means you don't have to be dashing off to amend your plan every 6 weeks because you thought of something that wasn't included in it. I mean, here you really start to see the wisdom of what you chose when you guys decided to sort of have this high-level strategic plan and then more detailed operating plan. And I guess the again, to just not to be repetitive, but what the plan of staff is to get back to you with more specific implementation plans as they would relate to your budget that'll help address some of the specific things that you're identifying. So this is really about a focus on, like, if this was too much of a straitjacket, then you might have wanted to change it, but it's actually kind of a wide open door for creativity.
Carolyn?
Just a quick question on this one, and it's saying have increasing operational efficiency to deliver greater levels of service across the town. Could that also include a variety of service levels? Is this pertaining to a certain service, or is it a variety of services? Is that kind of a weird question?
It's a weird question for me to answer, but I will because Jason isn't jumping in. And what I'll say is, I think this was to give you maximum flexibility and recognizing that because there's not a lot of new money, you'd increase your operational efficiencies and try to use those to invest in delivering better service. So it's the kind of what everybody aspires to, which is the do better for less by continuously improving. So I don't think it's basically a hard-edged commitment to improve every level of service notwithstanding, but it's more of a generic kind of observation about our goal is to be reinvesting.
Okay, thank you.
So that would include things like shared services where we can, find efficiencies in shared service, like how we get to have an extra person that ESSA pays for because we look after their IT, that kind of stuff. Also, if I remember correctly, where this actually evolved from was that whole, because we are a municipality that likes to, be bold. This is, yes, be bold, but still remember to fill the potholes and do the boring stuff that we have to do and do it well. Because if we don't have the meat and potatoes, the public is not interested in dessert. They'll lose confidence in us if we talk about the orbit, but we can't get their sidewalk shoveled or their garbage picked up, right? So it's about that foundation. Have a strong foundation.
I'm just referring you over to a couple of the other thoughts. One was a notion that we've got to focus on meet the expectations of health and safety. So that's like a particular kind of adaptation or enhancement. So like a great example would be using appropriate hand sanitizer and PPE to reflect current norms that might not have existed 6 months ago or 8 months ago.
That is a good point about adapting that way. Donna, I saw your hand, sorry.
Sorry, just find all my connections here. I lost the internet for a while. I like the fact that it's broad open because when I read this, I keep thinking about our reduction in services we have to provide with our financial restrictions at the moment. We're going to have to reduce or cut services. So enhancing the ones that we have, I think it's going to make us look at if we have to reduce some, what can we do to improve the ones that we have left? And in looking at how they're going to change, what's essential, and so I struggle with the financial viability of this one.
Well, we can provide whatever service level we want. We could have, gold snowplows if we wanted to. That's up to us. But we just need to pay for it. And our direction to staff was 0% budget. But it's our decision. We make that decision. I struggle a little bit about with help those who need it. I absolutely, but I don't know if that belongs in this section of, well, I guess with programs, yes. I'm thinking of things like, yes, we should have, like we do with our transit, right? So we have a program with transit where they don't pay as much as everyone else does if you're struggling. But at the same time, when it's a service, like when I think of basic town services, those are required by everybody at the same equal level. But Alex?
Yeah, I was just looking at the wording of what we have. It says increase operational efficiencies. And I just wonder whether or not there's an opportunity to expand it slightly to say increase operational efficiencies or improve economic prosperity opportunities, so that it's not always about looking at what you're doing and seeing how you can make something more efficient, but also looking at the opportunities that exist to bring in more revenue, because that's always the other side of the balance in terms of how do you bring in more revenue. So if you bring in more development, you bring in more taxes. If you bring in more commercial, you bring in higher taxes. So I just wonder when not to, can we alter this to look at that other side of the revenue generation opportunities?
So revenue, not just cost.
Exactly.
Okay.
Anyone else? Kenneth?
The idea of enhancing services, I see that as a method of streamlining it. How do we streamline the service? Like, for example, town has stepped up with the social media. They're creating a team to answer on social media when questions get brought up, alleviating what happens with our customer service team, the phone calls, the emails. We're finding a way to get the answers to the people quicker and in a more efficient manner, reducing the amount of hours and time invested in it. So in essence, what it looks to be is we're getting the greater amount of service with less strain and effort on the staff and the counselors themselves.
I can jump to the next section, which is connect. And there are 5 here. And once you get through this group of 5, you're mostly done. Not to say the last 3 aren't important, but you'll be well over halfway there. There's, and a couple of these are sort of similar. There's developing the unified town identity. There's enhancing the civic engagement, and there's facilitating community experiences. And it's definitely worth thinking about the overlap between those 3 things as you're thinking about them, because, you know, if you just remember that while we're on town identity, we've got civic engagement and community experiences following. The movement of people, more classic transportation type subject, and then enabling community health and wellness, which is one that we got a lot of community comment on, as was reported to you by Director Bose. So jumping to the first, developing town identity, the directive is that we'll provide all our residents the opportunity to get to know their neighbors, support one another, and live in a united community. This is very consistent with the focus on community building that came out of the community surveys that were done. So you'll recall that they had language about promoting neighborliness. That probably is directly linked to excluding Torontonians, by the way. Community outreach to cultivate relationships with groups and among individuals, and expanding volunteer connections and opportunities. There was a lot of very specific things here that would fall under this heading. So there's a very nice fit between the things that were identified as needs and this general umbrella that you could link it
to. Kenneth?
What I'm noticing, Innisfil, ever since there's been the mass exodus from the Toronto area, there's been a greater amount of cultural diversity in Innisfil that's grown over the past number of years. So we are in a state of flux. And the idea of connecting the various people, we have a Latin boom, we have a Russian boom, we have the Jewish population, we have a more diverse community that's evolving as more and more people are leaving Toronto, Mississauga, and Burlington, whatnot behind to come up to our area. So this is something that we have to be very aware of and tailor our ideas towards. The idea of breaking down the barriers between the new cultures that are coming up to Innisfil.
Actually, something that I hear a lot in other municipalities is also the need to be able to potentially, address the needs of different cultures in a sensitive way too, and whether that requires training or whether it requires, rethinking some of the services that you provide or how you provide them.
If I may, I believe it's more of an opportunity, getting people to associate and integrate with each other, as opposed to coming up and then staying within their own small circles, pre-COVID, obviously, and post-COVID.
Any other comment on this one?
I like all of the comments on the right-hand side, every darn one of them.
You can see if they're being endorsed, I'm converting them to yellow. If they're not, I'm just kind of leaving them. Why don't I show you the other two that I argue are kind of linked, and then we can jump back to 3.2 and 3.3, or sorry, enhance civic engagement. Create opportunities for the town to work collectively to solve shared problems, make informed decisions, set civic priorities, and bring about positive social change. Again, this was the sort of thing that seemed to attract ideas like improving coordination of access to services and that sort of thing. Many of the ideas that were in blue on the previous page. And perhaps just for ease, facilitate community experiences. This one's a little more broad, because it actually talks about developing a variety of inclusive programs and events that provide cultural, educational, recreational, entertainment opportunities for our residents. It's kind of the umbrella that goes beyond just individual action and moves to more programmatic type things in rec and culture and entertainment. So this is a broader one. But the three of them are all, broadly speaking, about community engagement and community building, which was one of the top 5 themes this summer.
And I would recall that when we were talking about this, we were coming into our 200th year, and we were going to have all these events and everything was going to be, and of course that all got COVIDed.
Look, I think these are very broad umbrellas, and it's tough to be opposed to any of them. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there's not much to be said about them. Enhancing the movement of, because they were well drawn when you did it a year ago. Enhancing the movement of people, that's eliminating distance barriers. Our residents will have the ability to travel safely to where they need to be, while we focus on developing innovative solutions to increase travel options and capacity. This is something that everybody talks about. You've actually done something about it with your Uber strategy, without blowing your brains out on very expensive fixed infrastructure. So don't ever forget how good an idea that was. Any other thoughts on this or anything specific? Probably worth jumping then to this one, which is not surprising since we're in the middle of a health crisis. This is the one that there was a fair bit of commentary on. Enable community and health wellness. So the comment was, we will collaborate and identify opportunities to improve and maintain, so both improve and maintain the health and wellness of our community, so residents can be their best selves. And there were a number of different suggestions. And I tried to sort of organize them by, there was the broadest, which was lead or advocate in ensuring Innisfil has adequate health and wellness, broadly speaking. And then there was a specific reference to COVID and or other pandemic preparedness. And then there was this other notion, which is more specific still, about equity and access. So that was about trying to sort of resolve the problem for people who don't have equitable access to services. And then there was a deep dive, which you'll recall was one of the big 5 areas, which was the mental health, which was considered a particularly growing problem in light of COVID. And so from the general down to the more specific, and then more specifically, improving the ability of communications. And then just to sort of wind it up, the other 2 broad ideas that came out of the consultation were one that we've already discussed on a previous page, the financial, food and housing security, and housing in a variety of norms. So I think we addressed those already. And then this was, you've already addressed this earlier on in the SWOT, that both the connectivity and the digital literacy aspect of high-speed access. I don't know if there's any comments or.
The access to town-owned facilities, is that, you know, somebody upset that we had things closed during the COVID emergency?
I couldn't tell you.
Donna?
Was that before, Lynn, for different groups to hold meetings in town facilities, or?
Maybe for volunteers to be able to access town hall.
Yeah, because for many of them, they have nowhere that they can meet. Different organizations, I think, clubs.
I thought we did that. Anyway, I think, do we have to specifically talk about mental health here, like post-COVID, or is this just saying health and wellness? Does that just include?
Well, this would cover everything, I think, within the broad ambit of health and wellness. So, you know, I think the real challenge for you all is, you know, we all lived through SARS. SARS was a huge thing in 2003, and by 2006, it was something that we'd all learned from, and obviously it was a tragedy, and it was an economic disruption, but we'd moved on. Although there were still lingering effects, you know, Luminato is a hangover from the attempts in those days to restart Toronto's tourism economy after Toronto had been singled out as a hotspot for SARS. So, you know, it's 17 years later, and we still have the Luminato Festival in Toronto, which has its roots as a restart. So one way to look at this is it's a great time to build in something specific about mental health or a specific call out to pandemic preparedness. Another way to look at it is we're not going to call out cancer. We're not going to call out other forms of health. We're just going to have, it's a strategic plan. It's not a laundry list. And so the important thing to know is we'll do what we do in the operating plans, but it can totally hang under health and wellness. So it's just a choice as to how you want to see your strategic plan evolve. But both would be legitimate as long as it's all about what you do with it once you've made the amendments.
I think I like it more general, and then we drill down, like we've got our health strategy, which elaborates more on it. But I don't want it to turn out to be. It's so funny. You can think about what everybody was when you work on this. It becomes very apparent what was happening that week that we sat down and did this the last time, and the same thing's going to happen this time. You're going to be able to say, oh yeah, that's what was on their minds that week, instead of looking at it kind of big picture.
Well, that's very fair. You know, I think if you give, there'll be a time for staff to come back and say, here are some things that we think we want to do in terms of either advocating or promoting or coordinating mental health services, working with the province, and, you know, recognizing that it's the province who takes the lead on these things. But there is definitely coordination work, though, that can be done. And there are plenty of muscular municipalities across the province that are sick and tired of waiting, that get more involved, or that find some community resources, or find some way to help really kind of lead on these things. And as long as staff knows that that's where your interests are, then they can give you an operating plan to deal with it, and that's the place to deal with this, many would say. So is this a general mood here that keep it general to health rather than calling it specific thing?
I'm not seeing any no's. So Carolyn?
I like the one of the improvement of communication, health information to residents, ensure paper. That is so, that's something that we still really need, because most seniors aren't computer literate. Like they just can't handle the computer. And even I am pretty good at the best, but there's times when I just get so frustrated and I just shut it off. And I deal with I'm on a computer all the time. So there's so many senior residents that don't even know how to turn one on. So they need paper. And there's so many places that will say, well, you just have to go online and find it. Well, hello, how do you do that? If you're a senior, you don't know how to do that. So I really like this paper service, because it's necessary until my generation is gone, and it won't be long. So just, you know, the younger ones like Ken and like all you other guys, you can deal with it. But the seniors, they need paper. I see you, Rob. You need paper. Yeah. So we still need paper. Don't take paper away. We cannot live with the computer alone. We need the paper. That's spoken as a senior. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
I'm going to underline that just to give effect. So is this on the right track as it sits now then? That, you know, over the next couple of years, what's Innisfil going to do? Well, we're going to enable community health and wellness. And whether it's a pandemic or whether it isn't, we're going to enable community health and wellness, or whether it's primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, mental health, public health. We're going to collaborate and identify opportunities to maintain the health and wellness of our community. And things will come and go, and they'll be in your operating plans.
Bike trails and exercise equipment in parks, and
so broader definitions of wellness, which is what you have, right? Okay. And that would lead us to sustain. And these are the ones that focus on the operations of your internal organization as they relate to infrastructure and financial sustainability, but also to long-term infrastructure and asset management, as well as financial stability in terms of taxes and keeping that in line, but also the big question of environmental stability. So turning to the first, maintain and protect existing infrastructure. Will identify and realize opportunities to extend and service life of existing infrastructure through the application of strategic investments and implementation of effective operational support procedures. I don't think I noticed anything in the SWOT that had changed in the last year as it related to like your long-term asset management. Maybe some greater sensitivity to specific issues. But any comments on this one? I will jump. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, John. I did think of one thing for the last one, the mental health one, or the health and wellness one.
Oh, yeah.
It ever occurred to me until COVID that socialization was a form of health and wellness. And didn't know that was a part of it, and now I know it is. Just by the number of lonely people I have call me.
Well, and it also speaks to the, like, rec is so important. You know, and your rec programs may seem like, oh, well, they're just rec programs, but for so many people, they're so essential. And it's directly linked to health, as you're saying.
Sorry, didn't mean to go backwards.
On the ensuring financial sustainability, I think I know the answer to this, given that you've already gone on the record with 0%. So you'll establish and enhance financial policies, plans, and controls to investigate new opportunities for increasing revenues, which I think captures points that one of the councillors made. It's about new revenues. It's not just about savings and cuts. And maximizing the value obtained from investments to ensure financial stability. So any deviation here from your last thinking?
Just the one thing I would say is I'm amazed. You said this was 16 months ago, and going through this now, I'm amazed at how many checks I can, even with COVID, how many check marks I can put besides, yep, done that, because we are one of the founders of the One Investment, and we've found a way to make our investments more profitable.
And then the last one, and unless we get into a lot of trouble on environmental sustainability, we are at risk of hitting our 430 target. Promote environmental sustainability, develop policies, strategies, and approaches with a view to improving the current environmental situation. We'll work to protect and enhance the town's natural resources, reduce the environmental impact of climate change, and the delivery of municipal services. Any changes there since you last considered this? Not seeing any. So I guess the main focus of, not so much change to the strategic plan, but rather just operational aspects, is probably as you bring life to some of the ideas around health and wellness, or as you bring life to some of the ideas around growth. And those are areas where you're going to be, lots of opportunity, but also lots of risk. So therefore, lots of diligence required. And I think, if you follow the yellow here in the document, and also not just here, but what I'll do is in my report, I'll cross-check the important things that you said during the SWOT analysis too. And I promise I'll make sure that if you've made the point up here and it totally applies to something down there, I'll make sure that it doesn't get stranded up here in the SWOT analysis. So we'll just make sure that it's connected. So, I mean, the last thing to look at would just be the vision and the mission. And the vision that you came up with that is a nice mix of poetic, community first, future next, and balance always. And then you like really brief, really concise, and then asterisk. And this is where your inner lawyers came online and provided all kinds of detail into what these slogany things meant. And so community first, you're locally minded, fostering ways to support one another, value insights and contributions, recognizing our role in the global community. So that's where you get into the environmental sustainability stuff. The future next, thinking about the future and innovation and recognizing the importance of decisions today. And then balance always, recognizing that in order to sustain the joy and prosperity of the natural environment, we've got to be guided by a commitment to responsible development and finding harmony between growth and conservation. So I'm not sure if any of this is clinging false today. And that may be a question that's better you might want to take a quiet read over these and submit any comments you might have over email or such. But that's where you were a year ago. Any immediate comments on the vision?
I'm not seeing any. Either everyone fell asleep on us, John, or there's no comments.
Well, it's not really surprising that you like what you agreed to a year ago. It'd really be if something was clanging. So there you go, Madam Mayor. There's your document.
Thank you very much for helping us through that, John. It seems daunting. It's like how to eat an elephant unless you have somebody like you who can put it into little bite-sized pieces and walk us through it. So really do appreciate that very much. Jason, back to you.
Thanks, Worship Members of Council. I would echo those comments. Masterful facilitation. Mr. Matheson, we appreciate it. Could easily have taken 12 hours, I think, to do that same amount of work. So we really appreciate that facilitation. Next steps here, Worship Members of Council, is to take these recommendations, this input that you've made, and provide you with any potential edits, refresh to the plan. Hopefully we'll get that to you for October 14th, which would be your sort of next regular council meeting that we can still meet the agenda for. We know that, as John said, it will inform the 21-22 budget work, and certainly everything you've shared with us today will also be great input for that process. So we'll work towards that timeline. Thanks very much, Your Worship, Members of Council, for your energy and participation today.
Thank you, and thanks to all of council. Yeah, I understand that, you know, this has been a bit of a marathon, but I want you all to know that people do appreciate us. I get at least 2 or 3 emails every day, somebody saying what a great job we're doing leading through these uncertain times, and I probably don't pass those comments on enough, and I should. So please understand that people are watching, and I know we tend to focus on the 1 complaint email instead of the 5 nice emails, but they are out there, and for as hard as we're working, we know that staff are working 5 times as hard as we are, and do appreciate all of the support that we get from all teams, or I guess our one team. So with that, I would ask for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation for the receive the strategic plan workshop presentation. Kenneth and Alex, all those in favor? That's carried. The confirming bylaw, moved by Bill and seconded by Kevin. All those in favor? That's carried. And just before we adjourn, I'm going to just quickly mention to all of you that MP Doug Shipley has challenged Innisfil Council in the Gilda Make Lemonade Out of Lemons something or other. So I foresee another one of those crazy team videos where instead of we're passing a cake pop, we're going to be passing a lemon. So everybody go out and get yourself a lemon somewhere. And more to come on that. Any other questions, comments, anything anyone would like to say? Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on that, if it is like the cupcakes, I don't want to be the one that eats the lemon at the end, please.
You can squeeze it into a cup. There you go, making lemonade. All right. So then a move for adjournment. We have Rob and Carolyn. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you taking the time, and glad we could get through it all. And we'll have another go at it when it comes back on the 14th. And just do some, in the meantime, if we rush through something and you get some more thoughts on it, I'm sure John would be happy to get an email from you. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Hey, you got Wednesday night off now. Aren't you glad?
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take it easy, everybody.